I felt my father's hand tremble as he raised his glass in the bright light of the grand hall. The chandeliers glittered above me, cut crystals scattering light like daggers on the polished marble, each glint a reminder of my own shattered world. 1 year after Tate married Alina, my fiancée once, Conrad Merrick stood before me beaming, as if nothing had changed. He held his glass aloft, a rehearsed smile curving his lips. "Congratulations, son," he said warmly, raising a toast to Tate. My brother mirrored the gesture with a smug grin, his eyes never flicking in my direction. I stood to the side, an invisible spectator at the celebration of my destruction. When my father set his glass down, the clink echoed in my chest like a hammer blow. He turned to me, face impassive. "Rent's due, Kellen, $900 by Sunday. You're an adult now." His words, clipped and devoid of affection, struck deeper than any insult. I forced my jaw not to clench so tightly that my teeth might crack. "Why do I pay?" I asked, voice rough, "while he gets rewarded?" I pressed the question as if my life depended on it. "Because he's worth it," my father replied smoothly, as though discussing the weather. "Worth it?" Tate, the brother who slid into Alina's life and stole my future, was worth a luxury car. I, on the other hand, was worth a monthly rent check. I glanced at Alina, her polite smile a thin veil over her guilt. My ring finger twitched where her engagement ring once rested, a constant irritant. I tasted bile as applause rippled around me. Faces blurred, my mother's eyes watering, friends whispering, colleagues nodding sympathetically. I forced a smile that tasted like ash. The memory of that night when I discovered them in my apartment surged unbidden. Tate lurking behind the door with that triumphant grin, Alina's eyes flickering with shame. My heart had dropped, the world tilting off its axis. My car had slammed into the guardrail mere moments later, torn metal matching the scream in my soul. The antiseptic odor of the ER, bright lights overhead. I remembered Tate calling our parents, soothing them with lies as I lay bleeding. Today, the betrayal felt orchestrated by my father's indifference, his selective love paying Tate while discarding me. I swallowed the urge to yell, to punch a hole through the elegant wall panels, to strip the veneer and expose every lie. But I could not betray my father's vicious satisfaction. Instead, I turned away from the center of attention, letting guests step aside as I made my way toward the exit. Behind me, laughter and music throbbed like a migraine. My shoes squeaked on the marble as I passed rows of banquet tables, plates of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, empty wine goblets gleaming under crystal light. My senses felt muted, as though I watched through thick glass. I tried not to flinch at the stares. Pity, curiosity, satisfaction. Each step away from the ballroom felt like shedding a layer of skin I no longer recognized as mine. When the grand doors opened, a cool night breeze wrapped around me, slicing through my suit like a revelation. The moon hung low over the manicured gardens, pale and silent. I paused, catching my breath as the noise inside receded. The distant murmur of voices became a faint hum, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The lawn stretched out before me, dew-kissed grass glinting under moonlight. I could almost hear Tate's laughter drifting on the wind, Alina leaning into him as my father nodded in proud approval. They would not think of me again tonight. A surge of anger and clarity flooded my veins. I recalled the nights I had spent scrimping for therapy sessions, paying out of pocket despite dwindling savings. I thought of the internships I had crushed myself with, the side jobs to prove I was more than a trust fund. We had built something together, Alina and I, but my father's approval always lurked behind every success. Now, that approval had evaporated, leaving a cavity of betrayal too deep to fill. I pulled out my phone, reading the barrage of missed calls from my mother. "Please come home." Tate's frantic messages. "Bro, can we talk?" Even Alina's number glowed insistently, though I refused to look. I swiped the screen until it powered off, forging a barrier between me and the wreckage of a life I once called mine. My mind drifted to Eden's Cross, a coastal town where our grandfather had once lived. A place so far removed from Merrick Manor that my name meant nothing there. I had made silent plans, packed a duffel bag with a few clothes, set aside a stack of savings envelopes. I had contacts in that town who knew of my work fixing antiques, and I had enough to rent a small room above a cafe. No one there would expect the Merrick name to mean entitlement. I could build something from the ground up, unlabeled by my father's manipulation or Tate's ambition. I took a step forward onto the gravel path, each crunch beneath my feet feeling like liberation. The moonlight guided me toward a slender road leading away from the estate. I felt fear tug at my chest. Fear of the unknown, of failure, of loneliness. But that fear paled next to the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and wasted devotion. I exhaled, letting the breath carry away every doubt I'd held for months. In my pocket, I felt the envelope thick with the remainder of my savings, enough for a fresh start. I straightened my shoulders, inviting the breeze to cool my hot skin. The night air was crisp and clean, freeing. I passed the marble pillars that gleamed white in the moonlight, reminders of the life I left behind, opulence built on lies, privilege balanced on the backs of the betrayed. I thought of the therapy journals I had abandoned, pages filled with my fears and hopes, thoughts that now felt like an alien language. I had once thought I needed validation from a father who saw me as a liability, from a brother who saw my love as an open door. That illusion shattered tonight. I refused another day of pretending I belonged to a family that used me as collateral. I climbed the slight incline of the driveway, the mansion's silhouette dark against the sky. I could hear the soft strains of music inside, the final strains of their celebration. I let them be. I didn't want their apologies or their explanations. Tonight, I wanted nothing but to become the person I was intended to be, free from the strings they had tied. I paused at the crest of the hill, looking back at the grand hall, bathed in golden light, laughter spilling from its windows. I felt a spark of emotion, sorrow that I had lost my place, relief that I no longer needed to prove my worth. I lifted my chin and made a silent vow. I would forge a life from my own choices, not my father's ledger, not Tate's ambition. I would find people who saw me for the man I was, not the pawn they used. The path stretched out before me, illuminated by the gentle glow of moonlight and fireflies dancing in the dew. I heard no footsteps behind me, no voices calling my name. I was on my own terms now. I exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing as I stepped away from Merrick Manor's iron gates, stepping into uncertainty and possibility. The breeze carried the faintest hint of salt from the nearby ocean, promising rebirth and resilience. My heart pounded with equal measures of terror and exhilaration. What came next was unwritten, a blank page I would fill with choices I made for myself. I would be unchained from the expectations and betrayals that had defined me. Tonight marked the end of my old life, a life measured by rent notices and fleeting affections. My shoes touched the cool pavement leading away from the estate. I felt my father's empire recede with every step. My brother's success, my ex-fiancée's hollow smiles, my parents' suffocating expectations. All of it remained behind me, trapped in the gilded halls of Merrick Manor. Here, under a sky heavy with stars and possibility, I embraced the unknown. I inhaled one final time, the crisp night air filling my lungs and forging something fierce inside me. I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. I was choosing myself. The world was wide and waiting. I would claim a future beyond my father's reach, beyond Tate's shadow, beyond the pain they inflicted. I was no longer their son or their heir. I was mine. That's when I knew I was done. I moved through the house like a ghost, silent and deliberate. The living room furniture sat in familiar places, but I saw it all with new eyes, as though someone had rearranged not the couch and coffee table, but the relationships and expectations that had shaped my life. I opened drawers and pulled clothes from hangers, folding each garment neatly. A reminder that I still cared about some semblance of order, even as the world around me had collapsed. My duffel bag lay open on the bed, empty except for the faint echo of the air I had already begun to leave behind. I slipped my favorite hoodie into its depths, along with the jeans I'd worn when Tate and Alina sucker-punched my heart a year ago. I packed the canvas sneakers that had carried me through late-night shifts and the worn-out t-shirts I used for therapy sessions I could no longer afford. I stuffed away unhelpful memories only in the garments themselves. The sweatshirt Tate had given me for graduation, the shirt Alina wore the night she told me she was in love with my brother instead of me. Each piece of clothing carried a story, but none of those stories mattered anymore. In the kitchen, I gathered the few dishes I owned. One chipped coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Brother," a mismatched bowl from my early days at college, and a fork dented by too many meals eaten alone. I slid them into a plastic bin, stacking them carefully so they would survive the journey to Eden's Cross. I paused when I saw the magnet holding up my mother's latest grocery list on the fridge door. Beside it, A post-it note in her familiar slanted handwriting reminded her to call the plumber and to pick up my favorite ice cream if she saw it on sale. Underneath, taped to the steel door, was a photograph of Alina and me on our engagement night, my arm around her slender waist, our eyes brimming with hope. I peeled it off, folded it gently, and placed it in a small envelope labeled Memories, Discard. I refused to carry that image with me. When all my worldly possessions were packed, no more than a duffel bag, a savings envelope thick with the last of my funds, and a few sentimental items tucked discreetly, I turned to the empty fridge door. The house felt impossibly silent, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to finish this final act. I uncapped a fresh Sharpie and ran the tip across the surface, my hand steady despite the knot inside my chest. My breath caught with each letter I wrote, the ink bleeding through the thin, magnetic paper. The words spilled out in one continuous line. This house owes me nothing, but I owe myself everything. Don't look for me unless you plan to apologize with actions. I pressed the note firmly against the cold metal, using another magnet to keep it from slipping. I held my hand there a moment longer, fingertips tracing the final period, as though I could etch this declaration into reality rather than simply scrawl it on a scrap of paper. For so long, I had deserved an apology from my family. An acknowledgement of the betrayal that had cost me my fiancée, my savings, my sense of self. Now, I was making a vow to myself. I would not return until I saw concrete change. I owed myself that much. I stood back and surveyed my handiwork. The message glowed ominously in the dim kitchen light, a silent challenge to anyone who would come looking. There would be no half measures, no empty words, only actions. I brushed my hand over my stubbled chin, feeling the rough prickle as if it were a reminder that I had grown beyond being their child. I inhaled deeply, committing to memory the smell of the air here, faint hints of last night's dinner, the lingering scent of pine cleaner my mother favored, and the sterile edge of white tile flooring. Everything I had known was here in this house, but tomorrow I would breathe a different air. I loaded the last items into my car in the early pre-dawn haze, careful to avoid the neighbors' windows. The street was quiet. No passing cars, no dog barking, only the faint hum of a streetlight. Every thump of my heart filled the stillness with urgency. I slipped behind the wheel, the steering wheel cool against my palms. I looked at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the exterior porch lights still glowing faintly. I closed my eyes for a second, committing the sight to memory. The front door, the potted plant beside it, and the nameplate that read Merrick. I knew I would not return to that name as it had been. My pulse slowed when I realized that I no longer belonged there, that I had outgrown that name. I drove away without glancing back. The acceleration felt like an exhalation, as though every bottled-up frustration, heartbreak, and sense of betrayal spilled out through the tires into the asphalt. The streetlights shifted in my peripheral vision, creating streaks of light that blurred behind me. My mind was too busy mapping a new future. Eden's Cross lay hundreds of miles south, a place where my grandfather once lived and where I would not be recognized as Kellen Merrick, the son who had failed. Instead, I would arrive as someone who could build a life from scratch, who could cobble together a new identity from the fragments of a broken past. I tried to sleep in the back seat, reclining the seat slightly and wrapping myself in the hoodie I had packed. The rhythmic sway of the car was almost comforting, like a lullaby for a heart that needed healing. But when I felt myself drifting into sleep, I startled awake at the image of my mother's voice screaming into the phone, the panic in Tate's messages, and the cold indifference in my father's voice. I shoved the memories away each time they crept in, remembering that I had no intention of going back. In the morning, my phone buzzed with 38 missed calls. Alina's name appeared at the top of the list, her number blinking like a neon sign. Below hers were Tate's frantic messages. Bro, please, come back. We can talk. My mother's name floated further down, her voicemails a barrage of tears and pleading. But I kept driving, the odometer ticking forward, each mile taking me further from their world. I had one last glance at the small envelope sitting on the console, my savings, labeled clearly for rent, food, and a life outside the Merrick empire. I pulled off at a rest stop just before noon, stepping out into the fresh air. I unlocked the door to reach for a bottle of water, and my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my mother. Where are you? Please call me. I pressed the ignore button. Let them call. They would see when I did not answer. I walked to the edge of the rest area. eyes on the horizon where the sky met the distant line of pine trees. I allowed myself a moment of regret. I would never see that kitchen again, never taste my mother's Sunday pancakes, never hear Tate's laughter echo in the hallway of Merrick Manor. But that regret was tempered by relief. A relief born from leaving behind a house that owed me nothing and stepping into a life where I owed myself everything. By the time the sun began its descent, I crossed the state line into coastal country, salt tanging the air, sea breeze teasing my hair. Eden's Cross lay ahead, a town so small that no one would know my name. I turned off the highway onto a narrow road flanked by dunes, where the only sound was the persistent cry of gulls. My car's tires crunched on the gravel driveway leading to the Whitaker Cafe, the rickety, weathered establishment where I had arranged for a room. I parked and stared at the peeling paint of the sign, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room. The steady beam of the afternoon sun illuminated the porch, revealing an old rocking chair that my grandfather once used to sit on while watching the tides come in. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sea salt mixed with coffee brewing inside. Before I exited my car, I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small envelope of savings. I counted silently, enough for the first month's rent, groceries, and a down payment on tools to fix antiques. I fastened the envelope beneath the passenger seat where my phone lay face down, screen off. I did not want the world to distract me from this moment. With one last look at the cafe, I climbed out, each step resolute and free from the weight of my family's expectations. I stepped onto the rough wooden porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The cafe bell tinkled as I opened the door, releasing a wave of warmth and the aroma of fresh coffee, cinnamon, and the faint musk of aged wood. Behind the counter stood Nora Whitaker, her gray-streaked hair tied back in a loose bun, as that had seen too many storms yet still held quiet kindness. She looked up from polishing a mug, and when she saw me standing there, tall and tense, she gave me a gentle nod. "You must be Kellen," she said, voice soft but steady. No surprise, no pity, just acceptance. I offered a small, tentative smile. "Yes, I'm here to move into the guest room." She wiped her hands on her apron and handed me the key on a simple wooden keyring. "Room is ready. No questions asked." I accepted the key, letting relief wash over me. I felt the mantle of being Kellen Merrick slide off my shoulders. Here, I was just a man looking for a place to start. As I climbed the narrow staircase to the loft above the cafe, I thought about the note I had left on the fridge back home. They would not come looking for me, not unless they were prepared to apologize with actions. And I doubted they ever would. Yet here, in the quiet hum of Eden's Cross, I felt hope stir in my chest for the first time in a year. I unlocked the door to my new room and stepped inside. The walls were painted a faded seafoam green, and the single window overlooked a field of wildflowers that swayed in time with the breeze. A wooden dresser stood in the corner, its surface dotted with a few framed photos, pictures of Nora's late husband and the cafe in bygone days. A small desk held a stack of local newspapers and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. I set my duffel bag on the bed and let the tension in my shoulders dissolve. I reached into my pocket for the savings envelope and placed it on the nightstand, a symbol of both my past and my new beginning. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed listening to the sea's distant roar, I replayed the events of the last 24 hours. The note on the fridge, the missed calls, the anger and disappointment I had left behind. For so long, I believed my family would come searching for me, that they would beg for forgiveness. But they had offered nothing but silence and screeching tires. Now, with the envelope tucked away and tomorrow's sunrise just hours away, I allowed myself to drift into sleep. Tomorrow, I would visit the local antique shop, my new source of income. I would introduce myself as just Kellen, not the disinherited son of Conrad Merrick. I would show up with tools and an earnest willingness to work. The thought of spending my days restoring old furniture, working with my hands instead of finance spreadsheets, filled me with quiet optimism. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited about what lay ahead instead of dreading the inevitable disappointment. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the salty air seeping through the cracked window to calm the storm inside. I owed myself everything, and tonight, I began repaying that debt. Eden's Cross was not just a place on the map. It was my refuge, my second chance. As I sank into the thin mattress, I whispered a silent promise to myself. No apologies, no turning back, only actions from this moment forward. With that vow echoing in my mind, I let sleep claim me, ready to face a future built on my own terms. Tate was always the golden child, the one who could charm a room and bend it to his will with a single grin. Even as a kid, he knew how to tilt his head just so to win over every teacher, every coach, every neighbor who mattered. I'd always been the one trailing behind, the second son with dirt under his nails and eyes too serious for family photos. But after he stole my fiancée, Alina, and then paraded her around town like a prize, I thought they'd won. I thought that was the end of the story. Turns out, it was just the beginning. It started with a photograph on social media, Alina's account, to be exact. A gala in some luxury hotel, all white linen tablecloths and sparkling wine glasses. She wore a silver dress that clung to her like it was sewn from starlight, her arm looped through Tate's like it belonged there. He had that same smug grin, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said, "I always win." But what caught my eye wasn't the dress, or even the way Tate leaned into her. It was the watch on her wrist, my design. The one I'd sketched out for her birthday the year before she left me for my brother. The prototype I'd poured months of overtime and every last favor at the local jeweler into, just to surprise her. And on Tate's wrist? The matching version he demanded after seeing hers, the one I'd ordered under pressure from Dad, who insisted it would keep the brothers bonded. I'd given it to him even though I knew, even then, that every time I looked at it I'd remember the look in Alina's eyes the day she said she didn't love me anymore. Seeing those watches again, hers and his, like twin trophies on display, felt like someone had ripped open an old wound and poured salt in it. I might have let it slide, but the internet didn't. A few commenters recognized the design, noted the resemblance to my earlier work, and started asking questions. Didn't Kellen design those? One asked. Another wondered if Tate had bought them both. The irony bit so deep it tasted like blood. I'd left town to escape this exact mess, but Tate and Alina had carried it with them, like a pair of peacocks strutting through my old life. By the end of the week, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it later, a woman's voice shook on the recording. "Kellen, it's Olivia. Maid of honor. I'm sorry, but Alina's not okay. She's unraveling. Did you really walk out with nothing? Because she's starting to ask questions she can't answer." Her voice cracked on that last line, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to hold. I sat on the edge of my new bed at Nora's place, staring at the sea through the cracked window, the sound of gulls and salt air mixing with the beat of my heart. I thought about how many times I'd played the scene over in my head. Alina choosing Tate, Dad rewarding him, me left with the bill and a suitcase full of disappointment. But hearing that she was unraveling? That was different. That was proof that their perfect world had a fault line running right through the middle. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I let the silence answer for me, because silence had always been my punishment in this family. Silence was what Dad gave me every time Tate did something that required me to step aside, to pay the price, to carry the blame. Now, that silence was my weapon, and I wielded it with more precision than I'd ever wielded any words. I went down to the cafe that night, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolling over me like a comfort I hadn't known in months. Nora was closing up, wiping down tables and humming to herself. She glanced up when I came in, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Rough day?" she asked, like she could see every broken piece of me. I gave her a half smile. "You could say that." Some ghost came knocking. She nodded, like she'd heard that line before. "Well, you're safe here. Nobody's got your number but the ones you give it to." She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, steaming and black, no sugar. Just the way I liked it. "Drink up. You look like you're fighting a war in your head." I took a sip, letting the bitterness ground me. "Feels like it," I muttered. The hum of the place, old ceiling fans creaking, the click of the cash register, the muted sound of a song from decades ago felt like a barrier against the chaos outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I didn't owe anyone an explanation or an apology. My family was too busy trying to keep their perfect world from falling apart to come looking for me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A couple of locals came in for a late snack, their laughter easy and unforced. I watched them the way you watch a movie, distant, detached, almost envious. I wondered if they had brothers who stole their lives, if they had fathers who made them pay rent for the privilege of existing. Probably not. I let that thought slip away, finishing my coffee with a final, bracing sip. When I got back upstairs, I checked my phone. More missed calls, more voicemails, all from numbers I'd learned to ignore. Tate's last message was a drawn-out sigh of desperation. "Bro, we need to talk. Things are not good over here. His voice trembled, like he was the one who'd been betrayed, like I owed him comfort. I almost laughed, but the laugh died in my throat, replaced by a steely resolve. Let him feel the ground shake. Let him learn what it meant to lose control. I powered down the phone and set it on the nightstand, its blank screen a small act of rebellion. I didn't owe them a reply, just like they'd never given me the decency of honesty. I stretched out on the bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and let the sound of the ocean seep into my bones. For the first time in months, I felt a calmness that didn't feel like defeat. I drifted off thinking about the watches, about Alina's shaking hands and Tate's panicked voicemails, about how easy it had been for them to build a life on the ruins of mine, and how quickly it was falling apart without me there to prop it up. I thought about Olivia, her voice trembling as she told me Alina was unraveling. Good. Let them both unravel. Let them feel the sharp edges of the choices they'd made. I'd spent a year bleeding for them. It was their turn to explain things now. As I closed my eyes, I pictured them, Tate staring at his reflection, wondering how his perfect image had cracked. Alina, twisting the ring on her finger, asking herself how she'd ended up with a man who'd stolen everything he had. And Dad, cold and calculating, watching his empire tremble because the son he'd dismissed had finally refused to be silent. I let the ocean's rhythm lull me to sleep, the scent of salt and wood and old memories blending into something that felt like home. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I was the author now, and they were the ones playing catch-up. I owed them nothing but the truth, and that was already more than they'd ever given me. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd wake up and keep living. I'd keep building the life they said I didn't deserve. And when they came looking for me, and they would, eventually, I'd be ready. Let them come with their apologies, their excuses, their pleas. I'd hold up the mirror and make them see every lie, every theft, every time they chose him over me. Let them unravel. Let them see what it felt like. Let them learn that sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. When I first pulled into Eden's Cross, the sign was so weathered I almost missed it. A battered wooden plank leaning at an angle, paint faded to the color of old bones, letters barely legible in the salt air. But I knew the place by heart. My grandfather's stories had drawn it for me 1,000 times. The smell of the sea drifting through the open windows, the old lighthouse standing guard at the edge of town, the people who wore their scars like medals instead of secrets. I had come here because I knew no one would remember me as the son of Conrad Merrick or the brother who lost everything. Here, I was just Kellen, a man looking to build something from the wreckage. I parked outside the Whitaker Cafe, the engine still ticking as it cooled. The air smelled like damp wood and ocean spray, and I let it fill my lungs as I stared at the small building. The sign overhead, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room, looked freshly painted, a bright contrast to the rest of the town's weathered edges. The windows glowed with a warm, amber light that seemed to spill onto the street, a small beacon calling me home. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and locked the car with a satisfying click, as if sealing away the last pieces of my old life. Inside, the cafe was almost empty except for a couple of locals nursing their coffee. The place smelled of cinnamon and brewing espresso, and something sweet, maybe caramel or vanilla. A record player crackled in the background, filling the space with a low, steady hum. Behind the counter stood Nora, her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a loose bun, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. She wore an apron dusted with flour, and her hands were steady as she wiped the counter. When she saw me, she paused, studying my face as if she'd known I was coming long before I had. "You look like someone who's trying to build a life from rubble," she said, not unkindly, just honest, her voice worn by years of speaking truths no one wanted to hear. I felt my shoulders drop, tension easing from places I hadn't realized it had burrowed into. "Something like that," I replied, my voice hoarse from the long drive and the longer silence I'd carried for months. She nodded, as if that was all the explanation she needed, and reached beneath the counter. A small key, worn smooth by time, dangled from her fingers. She slid it toward me. "Room upstairs. Sheets are clean, and the view's not bad if you like the ocean. Rent's due every Friday, but we can figure that out if it's too tight." She didn't ask for a deposit, didn't mention references. She didn't ask about my father or my brother. She just gave me a place to start. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I picked up the key and held it tight, feeling its weight in my palm. a solid thing in a world that had felt like smoke and shadows for far too long. I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, each step creaking under my weight, as though the building itself was testing me. The hallway smelled of old wood and lemon oil, and I found my door at the very end. The key fit the lock with a satisfying click. The room was small, a twin bed in one corner, a wooden dresser against the far wall, a window with a view of the ocean that framed the horizon in a way that made it feel infinite. I dropped my bag on the bed and crossed to the window, pushing it open so the sea breeze rushed in, cool and sharp, filling the space with the scent of salt and possibility. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. No one here cared that my father thought I wasn't worth a car, or that my brother thought my fiancée was his for the taking. No one here cared that I'd left behind a note on a fridge and a mess of family secrets. Here, I was just a man who'd come to fix antiques, maybe fix himself along the way. I leaned against the window frame, watching the waves roll in, the tide smoothing out the rough edges of the sand like a promise. Downstairs, Nora's laughter drifted up through the floorboards, mingling with the clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation. The sound was warm, real, nothing like the hushed, polite tones that had filled the halls of Merrick Manor. I realized, with a kind of soft shock, that I didn't miss that place. Not even a little. Here, in this small town at the edge of the world, I had a chance to be something new. Someone who didn't carry the weight of his family's expectations or his brother's betrayals. Someone who could be defined by what he chose to build, not what had been stolen from him. I unpacked my few things, folding shirts into the dresser drawers, lining up the tools I'd brought with me: pliers, chisels, sandpaper, small containers of varnish and glue. My hands itched to get to work, to take something broken and make it whole again. That's what I wanted for myself, too. To rebuild. To restore. To be something more than the sum of all the ways I'd been broken. As the sun began to set, I made my way back down to the cafe. Nora was wiping down tables, the last of the customers trickling out into the cool evening air. She looked up as I approached, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Settling all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Feels like a good place to start over." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. We can always use another pair of hands around here. And you seem like the kind of man who's got a lot of work to do, inside and out." I laughed, a sound that felt rusty in my chest but genuine. "You have no idea," I said, and she laughed too. "Maybe I do," she said, her smile softening. "But you're here now. That's a start." It was enough. More than enough. That night, I lay in bed listening to the ocean whispering to the shore, the sound of the tide a steady rhythm against the silence that had ruled my life for too long. I thought about my father, his cold smile as he handed Tate the keys to a new car. I thought about Tate, the way he'd smiled at me that night like he'd won some game he'd been playing all his life. I thought about Alina, the way she'd looked at me like I was an obstacle instead of the man she'd once promised forever. I thought about all of them, and I let them go. I let the ocean take them, washing them away like footprints in the sand. Here, in Eden's Cross, I wasn't a Merrick or a disappointment or a footnote in someone else's story. I was Kellen. Just Kellen. And that was enough for me. As sleep claimed me, I promised myself that tomorrow I'd find the antique shop my grandfather used to talk about, the one where old things wouldn't be made new again. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to make myself new, too. The tide rolled in, the moon climbed higher, and I slept like a man who knew that sometimes you have to walk away to find where you truly belong. The attic was hotter than I expected, a low-ceilinged furnace beneath the old cafe's roof. A single dusty bulb swung overhead, throwing shadows that danced like memories across the wooden beams. I hadn't planned on coming up here, but Nora had asked me to help sort through the boxes stacked in the corners, remnants of a life half forgotten, left to gather dust while the world moved on below. I knelt beside a stack of trunks, their brass latches tarnished by time, and something inside me tensed with anticipation. The scent of old wood, salt air, and the faint tang of musty paper filled my lungs. Each trunk felt like a time capsule, a chance to piece together the fragments of a story I hadn't known I was part of. I opened the first trunk with a creak that made me wince. Inside, layers of newspaper wrapped around delicate china cups, their handles chipped and paint faded but still whole. I unwrapped each piece carefully, like I was handling a part of my own history. These were the relics of a man I'd only known through family stories. My grandfather, the one who'd build a life here before my father turned everything he'd touched to glass and cold ambition. I found a photograph at the bottom of the trunk, my grandfather standing beside a younger Conrad Merrick, both of them wearing the same half-smile, like they'd agreed on a secret. I set the photo aside, heart tight. Dad had always acted like Eden's Cross was a footnote, a place he'd left behind in pursuit of something bigger. But here, in this attic, I saw that he'd once belonged here too. And maybe that was why he'd tried so hard to erase it from me. The second trunk was heavier, the hinges stiff with rust. I pried it open with a screwdriver, sweat dripping down my back. Inside, stacks of folders leaned against each other like drunks at a bar. Most were old receipts, invoices for cafe repairs, letters from neighbors. I flipped through them, page after page, until one manila envelope caught my eye. Its edges were frayed, the string tie barely holding it shut. Across the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Second will. Eden's Cross property." My breath caught. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the weight of it 1,000 times heavier than paper should ever be. I moved to a small work table by the window, sunlight filtering through grime-streaked glass. I untied the string and pulled the document free. My grandfather's signature stared back at me, steady and deliberate, as though he'd known this day would come. The will was dated a year before he died, well after the one my father had paraded around in court when he took over everything, when he made sure the Eden's Cross property became just another asset on his spreadsheet. But this will named me the heir. Not Conrad. Not Tate. Me. I read it 3 times to be sure, each word carving itself into my bones. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me like a truth I hadn't known I was waiting for. My grandfather had seen the same man in Conrad that I'd come to know, the man who wore fatherhood like a badge of convenience, who'd chosen Tate's smile over my steady loyalty every time. He'd seen the greed in Conrad's eyes, the way he'd let Tate plunder my life without so much as a word of apology. And he'd made sure that Eden's Cross would come to me, the one who actually valued it, the one who had come back when the rest of them had turned their backs. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, raw, bitter, but strangely freeing. Dad had probably destroyed the copy he kept at home, confident no one would find the other. He'd always been good at covering his tracks, at making sure the world saw only what he wanted it to see. But he'd underestimated the attic, the dust, the stubbornness of a grandson who wasn't willing to stay broken forever. I thought of Tate, his business booming with money that should have been mine, the same business I'd quietly subsidized without even knowing it. I thought of Alina, her diamond ring sparkling on stolen money and stolen promises. And Dad standing there with that cold smirk, telling me I was an adult now, rent due by Sunday. I could see them all so clearly, their lives propped up on the back of my sacrifices, their laughter paid for with my sweat and tears. But not anymore. I stuffed the will back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands still trembled, the adrenaline coursing through me like a second heartbeat. I had to protect this, had to make sure it got into the right hands. I needed someone who could stand up to Conrad Merrick and make this stick. I needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid of the Merrick name. That's when Jasper Holloway's card came back to me, a man my grandfather had mentioned in one of his letters, a local attorney with a reputation for being as stubborn as the tides. I'd seen his number scrawled on a post-it in Nora's kitchen, back when I'd first arrived. I remembered the neat, no-nonsense lettering in the sense that Jasper was the kind of man who wouldn't back down from a fight. I pulled out my phone and found his number, my thumb hesitating for a split second before pressing dial. The phone rang twice, then a steady, no-frills voice answered. Jasper Holloway. I cleared my throat, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Mr. Holloway, my name is Kellen Merrick. I think I just found something you're going to want to see. I didn't give him time to dismiss me. It's my grandfather's second will, the one that names me the heir to the Eden's Cross property. The silence on the other end was brief but charged, the kind of silence that spoke of gears turning and pieces falling into place. You sure about that? He asked, his voice low but urgent. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. I've got it right here in my hands. I gripped the envelope tighter, feeling the paper crinkle beneath my fingers. All right, he said after a beat. I'll meet you at the cafe in an hour. Bring the will, and don't let it out of your sight. We'll make this official. His voice carried a confidence that steadied me, a promise that I wasn't in this alone anymore. Thanks, I breathed. I'll be here. I ended the call and tucked the phone back into my pocket. My heart was still hammering, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was purpose. It was the first real taste of justice I'd felt since that night at Merrick Manor when my father raised his glass and toasted Tate's betrayal. I thought about that moment, about the cold emptiness in my father's eyes, and I felt the anger and betrayal inside me harden into something stronger. Resolve. I stood, brushing dust from my jeans, and glanced around the attic one last time. Boxes leaned in their corners, shadows gathering in the eaves. The ghosts of the past didn't feel so heavy now. I had the will. I had the truth. And I had the means to take back what was mine. As I headed down the narrow staircase, the air felt cooler, sharper, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I stepped into the cafe, the scent of coffee and warm bread wrapping around me like armor. Nora looked up from the register, her eyes curious but kind. "You all right?" she asked. I nodded, a small smile on my lips. "Better than I've been in a long time," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, good. You look like a man who's about to change his life." I took a breath, the second will heavy in my pocket, and met her gaze. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." And with that, I walked out into the fading afternoon light, ready to reclaim the piece of my life that my family had tried to bury. I closed the cafe door behind me and climbed the narrow staircase to my small room, my mind a storm of thoughts. The second will burned in my pocket like a brand, but I knew that paper alone wouldn't be enough to set things right. Jasper Holloway had promised to file it, to challenge my father's control, but I still felt like there was another piece of the puzzle waiting to be unearthed. My gut told me that if Dad had buried one secret, he'd buried others. That's why, after dinner, I found myself standing in the darkened hallway by Nora's storage closet, staring at the old safe she'd mentioned. A relic from the days when her husband had run the cafe. She'd given me the key earlier, her eyes wary but trusting. "You look like a man who needs answers," she'd said. The key turned in the lock with a heavy click, and the safe door creaked open like a confession. Inside, yellowed envelopes were stacked in neat bundles, each marked with dates and labels. At first, they looked like ordinary business records, utility bills, vendor invoices, tax returns. I flipped through them with numb fingers until one file caught my eye. It was labeled transfers, and my name was scrawled across the top in a handwriting I recognized all too well, my father's. My chest tightened as I pulled it free and opened it. Bank statements, wire transfers, documents with my signature, except I'd never signed them. My breath caught as I saw the amounts, thousands, tens of thousands, funneled from my account to Tate's business month after month. It was all there, black and white proof that my father hadn't just stolen my fiancée, he'd stolen my future. My hands trembled as I flipped page after page, each one a fresh betrayal. I felt a laugh, bitter and sharp, slip from my lips. They hadn't just stolen love. They'd stolen money, my identity, my trust. They'd left me with nothing, all while telling the world I was the failure. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up months ago, leaving only resolve. I took a deep breath and gathered every document, shoving them into my bag. My mind was already forming a plan. I'd send copies to the people who mattered. Jasper, the journalist who'd covered Dad's latest charity gala. Even Alina, if I felt like twisting the knife. Let them see the truth. Let them know who they'd been praising all these years. That night, back in my room, I spread the documents across the bed. The moonlight caught the edges like silver blades. I started scanning them, one by one, sending them to my lawyer, and then to an anonymous reporter in our hometown. My finger hovered over Alina's contact. I typed a message. "Ever wonder who really paid for that diamond on your finger?" Tick, tick, boom. I hit send and leaned back, feeling a calm I hadn't known in months. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, and it was long overdue. It was barely dawn when my phone started buzzing. I opened one eye, the screen casting a cold glow in the dim room. Alina's name blinked at me first, 17 missed calls by the time I scrolled through. Her voicemails played like a horror movie soundtrack in my head, frantic apologies, whispered pleas for me to talk to her. I let the messages roll off me like rain on glass. Tate's name followed, 3 voicemails, each one beginning with bro, like that word still meant something. The last one was ragged, his voice cracking. "Bro, let's just talk. Please. I didn't know everything. Can we fix this?" I could practically see his perfect hair disheveled for the first time in years. Then came Mom. Her voice trembled on the recording. Kellen, please. Your father's reputation is falling apart. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Please, you don't have to do this. She cried like it was my fault, like I was the villain for telling the truth. I stared at the ceiling, the lines of the cracked paint like a roadmap of every broken promise they'd handed me. But I wasn't the one doing anything. The truth was, the documents I'd sent, copies of forged signatures, bank transfers, the second will, were finally seeing daylight. Jasper had promised me that. We'll put this in the local paper, he'd said. Everyone will know what Conrad did. He delivered. By noon, the expose ran on the front page. Local businessman accused of embezzling son's accounts. My father's empire cracked like glass in a hurricane. I got a call from my old boss, who once told me I wasn't a good fit. He sounded nervous. Kellen, we didn't know your father blacklisted you. You were always qualified. We're sorry. There's an opening here if you want it. I hung up without answering. That wasn't my world anymore. Let them scramble. Outside, the town buzzed with rumors. People pointed and whispered. For years, I'd been the failure. Now they saw who'd really failed. Dad's kingdom was crumbling, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I'd always been unqualified, they'd said. But the truth? I'd been blocked. By the man who was supposed to build me up, not bury me. And now, finally, everything was unblocked. The weight on my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter, freedom. I stepped out into the morning sun and felt the warmth on my face. I wasn't the broken one anymore. The world was. And I was ready to watch it rebuild on my terms. The driveway to the estate felt longer than I remembered, its winding curve lined with manicured hedges that seemed to loom taller, shadows stretching across the path like silent accusations. Each step I took up that drive felt like a reckoning. My shoes crunched on the gravel, the sound sharp and final in the heavy afternoon air. I thought of all the times I'd walked this path before. Head down, shoulders tight, rehearsing apologies for crimes I hadn't committed. Not today. Today, I wasn't the one who owed explanations. Dad was waiting for me at the top of the steps, standing in front of the heavy oak doors like a king holding court. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into that thin line I'd come to recognize as both warning and challenge. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, studied me as though he still believed he could reduce me to the trembling boy I used to be. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was the man holding the truth. He didn't invite me in. He didn't offer a drink or a seat. He just stood there, hands folded, his silence a weapon. I met his gaze and refused to look away. This is your legacy, Kellen? He asked finally, voice low and hard. Dragging our name through the mud? I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Dad. This is your undoing. I just stopped protecting you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick file. Copies of the second will, the forged bank transfers, the statement showing every cent he'd siphoned from my accounts. I held them out to him like an indictment. His hand hovered for a second, then closed around the file. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, the color draining from his face with each revelation. I watched him carefully, every reaction cataloged and filed away. I'd spent a lifetime memorizing his tells. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth when he lied, the way his eyes darted when he was cornered. Today, he had nowhere to run. You think this will hold up? He asked, his voice strained, but that arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. You think you can just waltz in here with a stack of papers? And I cut him off. If you try to spin this, I'll release everything. To the press, to the police, to every investor who ever put a dime into Tate's business. I leaned in, my voice steady, unshakable. You have until Monday to settle. Sign over Eden's cross. Pay back every cent you stole from me. And make a public apology. Or I burn every bridge you've built. The words felt like steel on my tongue, hard, deliberate. He taught me that. He taught me that words could be weapons. His jaw flexed, the file trembling in his grip. You think you've won? He spat. I didn't flinch. I didn't win anything. I just took back what was mine. The truth settled between us like a blade. I saw his shoulders slump, the fight bleeding out of him. He'd built his empire on lies and stolen trust. Now it was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He looked at me then, not as a son or a rival, but as an equal. And maybe that was the worst punishment of all for him. He couldn't control me anymore. He couldn't twist my life to fit his plans. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. And it felt like justice. Go, he said finally, his voice ragged, like the wind had been knocked out of him. Take what you want. Just leave me with something. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of every lie had finally crushed him. I didn't pity him. I didn't hate him. I just saw him for what he was. A man who'd spent his life taking until there was nothing left but dust. I turned and walked down the steps, the file still in his hands, my own future no longer tangled in his shadows. The sun had dipped lower now, the sky painted in bruised purples and oranges, as if the world itself recognized the end of an era. As I reached the bottom of the drive, I paused and looked back. The estate loomed behind me, its windows catching the dying light. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, freedom. For years, that house had been my prison, a place where I'd measured every word and every breath to keep the peace. But now? Now it was just a building, a relic of a family that had eaten itself alive. I took one last breath of that air, sharp, with a hint of old roses and cut grass, and turned my back on it. The path ahead of me was uncertain, but it was mine, and I would walk it without apologies. I'd come for the truth, and I'd found it. The rest was up to him. As I reached the road, my phone buzzed. Jasper's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice clear. "It's done," I said. His tone was calm, but firm. "Good. We'll finalize everything Monday. You did the right thing, Kellen." I looked at the estate one last time, the dying sun casting long shadows across the lawn. "Yeah," I murmured. "For once, I really did." And with that, I turned toward Eden's Cross, the sea breeze on my face, and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. It was time to build a new one where the only debts owed were the ones I chose, one where I wasn't a footnote to someone else's story, one where I was free. Monday came with a gray sky that seemed to weigh heavily on everything beneath it, a fitting backdrop for the reckoning I'd set in motion. I arrived at Jasper Holloway's office early, the manila folder in my hand like a key to a door I'd waited my whole life to open. Jasper's assistant led me to his office, a cozy room lined with old books and worn leather chairs. The smell of coffee and aged paper calmed me, a reminder that some places still felt human. Jasper sat behind his desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he scanned the documents I'd given him. He looked up, his eyes sharp and satisfied. "They're ready to settle," he said. "Your father's legal team contacted me first thing this morning. They want this quiet. No drawn-out court battles, no headlines that tarnish the Merrick name. You'll get everything your grandfather left you, plus full restitution for the money they siphoned from your accounts. And your father has agreed to a public apology." He paused, studying my face. "It's everything we asked for, Kellen. It's more than fair." I let the words sink in, the enormity of them. For years, my father had treated my life like an inconvenience, a place to dump his mistakes. Now he was being forced to acknowledge what he'd done. Not in whispers, not behind closed doors, but in front of the world. I felt a tremor of something like triumph, though it didn't feel as sweet as I'd once imagined. It felt necessary, like setting a broken bone straight. Tate, too, had taken his share of the blow. Jasper had shown me the documents. His startup investors had fled the moment the embezzlement story broke. The business that had once made him the golden child was now a castle of sand dissolving in the tide. I wondered if he'd ever understand the price of building your success on someone else's sacrifice. Alina had called me twice that morning, her messages a jumble of apologies and explanations. But I deleted them without listening. She'd made her choice the day she left me for my brother. Some bridges don't just burn, they collapse. I signed the papers with a steady hand, the pen gliding over the pages like a final signature on an old wound. Jasper notarized everything, his seal pressing into the paper with a quiet finality. "You did it, Kellen," he said, his voice low but proud. "You took your life back." I nodded, my chest tight with the weight of it. "Yeah," I murmured. "I did." We left his office together, stepping into the damp morning air. The clouds threatened rain, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Jasper clapped me on the shoulder. "I'll handle the filings," he said. "You go live your life." He smiled, the kind that made me feel like I'd done more than win a legal battle. I'd won something bigger, my freedom. I drove straight to the estate, the deed to Eden's Cross in my pocket, the apology letter from my father waiting in the glove compartment. The driveway seemed shorter this time, less imposing. The house loomed, but it no longer felt like it could swallow me whole. My mother met me at the front steps, her eyes red, her hair pulled back like she'd aged 10 years since the last time I'd seen her. She reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Kellen, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have." Her words trailed off, tears brimming. I squeezed her hand, feeling an ache of something like forgiveness. "It's done now, Mom," I said gently. "He's not my responsibility anymore." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and I felt a pang of sadness for the woman who'd stood by him for so long. But I couldn't carry her guilt, too. I had my own life to rebuild. Inside, I found Dad in his study, the place where he'd orchestrated every betrayal. He looked smaller now, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He held the apology letter in one hand, the other drumming nervously on the desk. He looked up when I entered, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. I raised a hand, cutting him off. "You have until tomorrow to make the apology public," I said, my voice calm. "Don't think for a second I'll hesitate to release everything if you don't. You signed the settlement. I expect you to honor it." His eyes darted away, shame or fear, I couldn't tell. "All right," he whispered. "All right." I turned and walked out, each step freeing me a little more. I didn't need to hear his excuses. He'd already said enough. I drove back to Eden's Cross with the deed in my hand, the apology letter a folded piece of paper that no longer defined me. Nora was waiting in the cafe, a cup of tea steaming on the counter. She looked up and smiled, her eyes warm and knowing. "Well," she said, "looks like you stopped disappearing." I let out a slow breath, the weight finally lifting. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "I think I did." I took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth fill the cracks that betrayal had left behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, and the world, for once, felt like it belonged to me. The night sky over Eden's Cross stretched wide and deep, a canvas of stars and salt air, reminding me of the bonfires my grandfather used to build on the beach, gatherings of neighbors, the glow of laughter and music weaving through the dark. I'd always thought those nights were just a piece of his charm, a relic of simpler times. But now, standing on the sand with the cool wind at my back, I saw it differently. Those bonfires were about community, about giving people a place to feel seen and safe when the world felt cold. That's what I wanted to build. Not for my father, not for Tate, for me, and for every kid who'd been told they didn't matter. The Firelight Foundation started as an idea scrawled on a napkin in Nora's cafe, a name that felt like a promise. I poured every cent of my restitution into it. A program for young adults who'd been pushed aside by family, by the system, by life itself. A place where they could learn skills, woodworking, painting, antique restoration, anything that gave them a chance to reclaim their worth. Nora joined the board without hesitation, her eyes shining with the same stubborn kindness that had offered me a room when no one else would. Jasper handled the legal side, weaving my grandfather's will into the very bones of the foundation so no one could take it away. I gave the first talk myself, standing in front of a handful of skeptical faces in a repurposed warehouse that still smelled of salt and sawdust. I told them my story, not as the victim of a powerful father, but as a man who'd found his way out of the shadows. I spoke about being a son, a fiancé, a scapegoat, about learning that sometimes the people you think you need most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, and how that pain doesn't have to define you. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of every shared story pressing down on us like a heartbeat. Afterward, one of the guys, just 20, thin as a reed, with bruises on his arms he didn't bother to hide, came up to me. "You really got out?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, and he looked down, his eyes shining. "Then maybe I can too." That's when I knew. This was where I was meant to be. Not in the halls of Merrick Manor, not in Tate's shadow, but here, helping build a fire that no one could snuff out. The first months were hard, funding was tight, and every setback felt personal. But each time I saw one of those kids walk through the door, head held a little higher, eyes a little clearer, I knew we were on the right path. Nora kept the coffee brewing, Jasper kept the wolves at bay, and I kept showing up. That's what mattered most, showing up, not just for them, but for myself. In the end, I didn't need my father's approval or Tate's envy or Alina's apologies. I needed my own courage to step into the light. The Firelight Foundation became more than a program. It became my family, a place where every scar was a story, and every story was a reason to keep fighting. And in their eyes, I finally saw myself, not as the disappointment they'd always whispered about, but as the one who got away and thrived. The envelope came on a Wednesday. Heavy stock, embossed gold letters, sealed like a royal decree. It sat on the kitchen counter beside a half-drunk smoothie and a pile of bills Marissa never bothered to open. I stared at it for a second, then peeled it open, already guessing what it was. A wedding invitation. Her brother Logan's name practically glittered off the card, entwined with some debutante named Celeste Preston. I didn't need the footnote to know the Prestons were old money, the kind of wealth that had corridors named after them in museums, not just buildings. The kind that made people like Marissa buzz with ambition and polish their smiles. She walked in just as I was reading it, holding up 2 swatches of fabric like they mattered. "Try to dress up for once," she said, her tone breezy, already flipping through a designer catalog spread across the island. Logan's marrying into the Prestons. It's going to be huge. Of course it was. Everything was always huge with them. Dinners, fundraisers, reunions. Lavish, public spectacles that made them feel important and made me feel like furniture. She didn't ask if I wanted to go. She didn't have to. It was never a question. We were going. She caught the pause in my breath, the way I lingered too long over the card. "Don't start," she added, not looking up. "It's just a weekend. One weekend. Smile, show up, and don't embarrass me." That last part landed like a slap she didn't even notice throwing. It wasn't the first time. I wanted to remind her I'd been showing up for 10 years. For her family's events. For holidays where I was treated like a temporary seat filler. For dinners where I was the joke at the far end of the table, laughed at because I had dared to leave law school and chase some startup pipe dream. They didn't know who I really was. Not the Prestons, not Logan, not even Marissa anymore. Somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten. Or maybe just stopped caring to remember. I could have reminded her. I could have told her that the startup pipe dream became Atlas Industries. That while she and her family drank champagne and gossiped about me, I'd been working 15-hour days behind closed doors, slowly building one of the most influential tech firms in the country. That I had deliberately kept my name off the filings, off the press releases, off the radar, because I didn't need applause. I needed leverage. But I didn't say any of that. I just folded the invitation neatly and slid it back into the envelope. "Sure," I said, my voice calm. "I'll be ready." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her catalog. She never asked what I meant by ready. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like walking through a rehearsal for a play I didn't belong in. Marissa met with planners and stylists. She gushed about the estate's vineyard and what designers Celeste might wear. She treated it like a royal coronation. Logan was marrying up, and by extension, so was the entire family. Especially her. One night, I caught her on the phone with her mother, laughing. "He'll look presentable." I picked the suit myself. No, nothing flashy. Just enough to blend in. I don't want the Prestons asking where I found him, like I pulled him off a Craigslist ad. I stood in the hallway, out of view, just listening. I didn't confront her. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I sat in my office later that night, opened my laptop, and confirmed the final steps of a business deal I'd been structuring for over 6 months, one that had started with acquiring a small but critical supplier that served exactly one client. Preston Tech, Logan's company. I had watched them slowly grow dependent on us, contract by quiet contract, until they were practically feeding out of our hands. It wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about timing. And this wedding, this spectacle, was the perfect stage. I wasn't just going to attend Logan's wedding. I was going to walk into the belly of the beast wearing a quiet smile and carrying a secret they weren't ready to see. I picked out my own suit. Tailored, dark slate wool, minimalist. Sharp but subtle. No designer logos. No flash. Just precision. Because unlike the Prestons, I didn't need labels to announce my value. I was the label. The night before we left, Marissa kissed my cheek and held up a little gift box. "For the weekend," she said. Inside was a tie clip, gold-plated, monogrammed with my initials in a font that didn't match my style. "Thanks," I said. "Don't forget to smile," she replied. "The photographers are everywhere. And remember, you're a guest. Let Logan shine. This is his weekend, right?" The next morning, we boarded a private shuttle to the estate. Acres of manicured lawns, ivy-draped facades, fountains that looked like they came with Roman permits. It was a kingdom built for people who believed they were born to be applauded. Marissa couldn't stop grinning. "Doesn't it feel like a dream?" I looked out the window. Something like that. But I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. And this time, I wasn't just tolerating her family. I was about to reintroduce myself to them. Quietly. Thoroughly. Permanently. 10 years ago, I stood at Marissa's family dining table holding a glass of cheap wine and a heavy silence, as Logan made another joke at my expense. "So let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair, loud enough for the whole room. "You dropped out of law school to build apps? What's the name of your company again?" Hopeful and hungry. The room laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. Full-throated, smug laughter that felt like it was trained to hit me from all angles. Even Marissa chuckled. She rubbed my back like I was a loyal golden retriever, loyal but pitiful. "He's ambitious," she said, her voice the only thing soft in the room. "He believes in what he's building." That was 10 years ago. I hadn't forgotten a second of it. They didn't know I was building Atlas Industries on a 2-year-old laptop and grocery store coffee, working out of a cramped apartment that shared a wall with a dog that barked like it was being electrocuted nightly. My friends stopped calling. Investors turned me down like I had a contagious disease. I skipped dinners, skipped sleep, skipped birthdays. But every rejection taught me where not to knock. Every failure burned away the noise. Marissa supported me at first, sort of. But she always compared. Logan with his promotion at Preston Tech. Her cousin, Drew, getting his MBA. "Maybe you could network more," she said once, folding laundry. "Like Logan does. He's always at conferences." As if shaking hands was the same as building something from dust. What she didn't know, and never asked, was that I wasn't networking because I was working. Because I was coding, hiring, firing, taking calls with overseas suppliers at 3 in the morning, and learning how to negotiate without blinking. I needed help setting up the company structure without drawing attention. That's when I called Uncle Cyrus. He was a retired civil engineer with just enough savvy and just enough gray hair to be taken seriously by banks and boards. He agreed to be the front man. "Only if you promise to keep your name in the dark," he warned. "If people know who really owns this thing, they'll come for your throat before your first real quarter." So I stayed in the shadows. While Marissa's family gushed over Logan's LinkedIn updates, I built the foundation of Atlas in silence. I watched Marissa become more and more drawn to the shiny things, her mother's pearls, her father's political galas, Logan's golf club events. She'd ask if I wanted to go. I'd say no. Not because I was antisocial. Because I knew I wasn't ready yet. She started introducing me as just a tech guy. It used to be my husband who's building something. Then it was just my husband. Then it was, oh, he works with computers. Like she didn't know the grit under my nails came from something bigger than a keyboard. Still, I waited. I watched Logan rise through Preston Tech like a man on a trampoline, bouncing higher off the strength of his last name and who he had dinner with. His success wasn't built. It was inherited and polished. He kissed rings. I chewed glass. There was one night I remember too clearly. Our anniversary. Year 6. Marissa booked us dinner at a rooftop spot uptown. Pricey, pretentious, and perfect for Instagram. Midway through the wine, she dropped her fork and said, "Sometimes I think I married the wrong brother." It was a joke. At least, I think it was. But the fork didn't drop itself, and her laugh didn't reach her eyes. I told her, "I'm not trying to be Logan. I'm trying to be something different." She waved me off. Different doesn't get written into wills. And that's when I realized she didn't see me, not the real me. She saw the image of a man with dreams and none of the wealth her family could proudly discuss at brunch. I said nothing that night, just drank my wine and watched the skyline. But I didn't forget. I never forget. Over the years, as Atlas grew, I made sure every decision added weight to a structure no one saw coming. I diversified under shell names. I built partnerships with companies Logan's own firm relied on. I watched him strut into headlines while never realizing how deep my roots had grown beneath the soil he danced on. Marissa never noticed the shift. She thought I was stable, maybe a little boring. She liked when I kept quiet, played the supportive husband at holiday dinners, let Logan dominate the room. I didn't mind. Let them think I was the joke. Let them pour wine and whisper under their breath. I was the ghost in my own marriage, yes. But ghosts have their own power. They haunt, they watch, and they wait. By the time Logan's engagement to Celeste Preston was announced, I was already moving chess pieces. Preston Tech's supply chain was a fragile ecosystem. Atlas, operating through SP Capital and 2 other intermediary firms, began acquiring the smaller suppliers they depended on. Quietly, legally, ruthlessly. It took 6 months. Not a single headline. When the gold embossed wedding invitation arrived, I knew what it really was. Not a celebration. A summons. The joke was over. The nice guy with dreams had built a throne in the dark. Now, it was time to bring it into the light. The morning of the wedding arrived dressed in pastel silk and arrogance. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the cuffs on my slate gray suit, the one Marissa said was too understated for a wedding of this caliber. She wanted me in something loud, something shiny enough to pass her family's inspection. But I didn't dress for their approval. I dressed for control. Marissa swept into the room in a designer gown that probably cost more than our first car. Her hair was pinned up like a sculpture, her earrings sparkling like they belonged behind museum glass. She didn't look at me so much as past me. "Try not to slouch," she said, fixing a non-existent wrinkle on my lapel. "There'll be photographers." I gave her a smile I didn't mean and followed her out the door. The Preston estate looked like something out of a political dynasty's campaign video: rolling vineyards, fountains that danced on schedule, valet drivers in matching jackets. We were chauffeured up the curved driveway in a black SUV, but the moment we stepped out, I might as well have been invisible. Marissa instantly became one with the setting. Her stride matched the gravel paths. Her laugh synced with the chamber music floating on the breeze. She belonged here, or at least thought she did. I was the afterthought, the footnote, the prop. The guests looked like a stock portfolio came to life. Senators, CEOs, a few washed-up actors from daytime soap operas. Everyone looked expensive, bored, and just sober enough to network. They greeted Marissa with cheek kisses and compliments. Most barely looked at me. If they did, it was with that vague, dismissive curiosity reserved for someone's third husband. I scanned the estate, noting the details most would miss. The security team was visible but discreet. The catering company wore branded lapel pins. Photographers moved like shadows, capturing curated moments. And somewhere behind the marble columns and glass walls, the Preston family waited. When we entered the reception hall, Marissa was whisked away by her mother and two aunts like a debutante at her final showing. No goodbye. No glance. I was left to trail behind, unclaimed. My name wasn't on the immediate family registry. Instead, I found myself redirected by a frazzled event planner who looked me up and down, then pointed to the third row. Third row. Not the front with Marissa. Not with Logan and the wedding party. Not even with her cousins and distant relatives. I was seated behind a hedge fund manager's wife and across from a man who spent 20 minutes on the phone arranging a private jet for his dog. I took my seat silently. I didn't come for the flowers or the vows. I didn't need the front row. I was here for the reckoning. Logan made his grand entrance to a symphony of claps and forced admiration. He looked exactly how I remembered, cocky, polished, and hollow. His tuxedo was custom, his smile was blinding, and his confidence reeked of someone who had never truly earned anything. When our eyes met, he looked past me with the same indifference he used 10 years ago when he joked about me being a professional dreamer. The bride, Celeste Preston, was everything I expected. Elegant, cold. Born into a world where affection was as transactional as a merger. She clung to Logan like she already regretted the contract they were signing. Her family watched the ceremony with proud, empty smiles. As the ceremony began, I tuned out the officiant's voice. Instead, I watched Marissa. She sat in the front row, shoulders straight, smile frozen. She glanced back once. Her eyes landed on me, hesitant, expectant. She had no idea. The vows ended. Applause thundered like cannon fire. Drones flew overhead, capturing the moment. Photographers rushed the aisle like paparazzi chasing a scandal. Champagne was passed before the couple even kissed. At the reception, I drifted through the crowd like a ghost. Marissa laughed with Logan's friends, never introducing me once. Her father gave me a half-hearted nod, the kind that acknowledged presence, not personhood. I found a quiet spot near a marble pillar and watched it all unfold. The power games, the alliances, the whispered deals between drinks. And still, they didn't know who I was. They knew me as Marissa's husband. A man too quiet to be important. A man who'd once been the joke at the dinner table. But that was about to change. I checked my watch, then checked my phone. A message blinked across the screen from Cyrus. All set. Your call when ready. I didn't press send. Not yet. Timing mattered. Logan walked past me, laughing with two men in tailored suits. He didn't look at me. Not once. It was as if I was part of the staff, maybe the IT guy who came to fix the Wi-Fi. Good. Let them underestimate me. It was what I counted on. The DJ switched to a slower tempo. Couples filtered onto the dance floor. The Preston patriarch gave a short speech about legacy and tradition. Logan followed with a speech about innovation and forging new futures together. I sipped my drink and listened closely. Every word was a mirror, hollow, reflective, empty underneath the shine. When the applause ended, Logan raised his glass and said, "To new beginnings." I smiled. Oh yes, new beginnings, indeed. But this wasn't his. It was mine. And tomorrow, the masks would fall. I should have known better than to look for a place card at all. The reception was a sprawling affair spread across 2 levels of the Preston estate, a ballroom above, with gold-trimmed everything into view of the vineyard, and a tinted garden area below, supposedly for the overflow guests. They made it sound elegant. It wasn't. It was a polite way of saying, "You're not one of us." I combed through the main hall tables first, ignoring the stares of guests who clearly didn't recognize me. That was the theme of the day, blending into expensive furniture. I scanned each card, row by row, expecting at least a mercy seat near Marissa's extended family. Nothing. I searched again, slower this time. Still nothing. Then came the nudge. "Looking for your seat?" Logan's voice was a rusted knife. Familiar and jagged. He stood beside me, drink in hand, tie slightly loosened like he owned the oxygen in the room. The smirk on his face hadn't changed since that night he called me a dropout with delusions. "There's a table out back," he added, gesturing with his chin toward the lower tier. "Where the help eats." Behind him, a few of his friends chuckled. Not the loud, raucous kind. The sharp, private kind meant to wound without leaving visible scars. Logan didn't laugh. He didn't need to. His smile did all the damage. I stood still, staring at the man who once laughed as I poured coffee from a vending machine during a family gathering. The man who mocked my worn laptop, who told Marissa I was building castles in the cloud and not the kind that pay rent. My wife didn't stop him. She stood across the ballroom, drink in hand, talking to her cousin and laughing at something I knew was at my expense. She glanced at me, caught Logan's smirk, and then she smirked too. That was the moment something final clicked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and stepped 3 paces away from the crowd. My fingers hovered briefly above the screen, not with hesitation, but with intent. Timing was everything. I pressed a contact. Cyrus answered on the second ring. "It's done," I said. He didn't ask for clarification. "All right. Canceling the deal now." I hung up. No threats. No warnings. No theatrics. Just one sentence that would pull the floor out from beneath them. Logan's laughter faltered. He took a step closer. "Who the hell were you just talking to?" I turned my phone toward him. On the screen, the Atlas Industries logo glowed like a lighthouse in a storm. I watched his expression change: confusion, realization, then horror. "The $50 million semiconductor contract," I said calmly. "The one keeping Preston Tech breathing. It's gone." "What?" he barked. "You can't." "I just did." His grip tightened around his glass. His jaw twitched. "You don't even work in semiconductors." "No," I said. "I own the company that owns the company that supplies the company you depend on." It took him a few seconds to connect the dots. I could almost see the gears grinding. The failed suppliers they tried to replace over the past few months. The weird delays. The sudden price hikes. The obscure holding company, SP Capital, that emerged from nowhere. The shelf firms. The quiet acquisitions. All roads led to Atlas. And all of Atlas led to me. Marissa was walking over now, her heels ticking against the marble like a clock winding down. "What's going on?" she asked, but her eyes were already locked on my phone screen. I saw the moment she realized. Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned pale. The same Marissa who told me to smile for the photographers. The same Marissa who introduced me as just a tech guy. The same woman who once said she envied Celeste for marrying a man with direction. She'd married one too. She just never bothered to look close enough. Logan's voice cracked. "You're behind Atlas?" I nodded. He stared at me like I'd betrayed a script everyone else had agreed to follow. In his world, I was supposed to be harmless. Background noise. The guy who held Marissa's coat and paid for the valet. But now the joke had a face. And it wasn't laughing. "I told you," I said to Marissa, "I didn't need to be in the spotlight. I just needed the right moment." Panic moved like a ripple through the room. Phones came out. I started. Someone whispered, "Is that the guy from Atlas?" A woman clutched her husband's arm. Waiters paused mid-pour. The string quartet's song stumbled. I walked toward the overflow area Logan had mocked and found my place card. Table 19. Staff overflow, it read. I picked it up, examined the elegant calligraphy like it was a relic. Then I pocketed it. Logan was still frozen. Marissa stood beside him, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. I took one last look at them, the golden boy with no spine and the woman who mistook silence for weakness, and walked back toward the garden. I wasn't just attending the wedding anymore. I was rewriting the guest list. And this time, I didn't need an invitation. The thing about power is this: it doesn't always walk in wearing a crown. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in a gray suit and calm voice, pressing a single button while everyone else is still sipping champagne. Logan came storming after me, footsteps frantic on the marble as I stepped onto the stone pathway that led down toward the garden. His drink was still in his hand, but he wasn't holding it like a prop anymore. His fingers clenched the glass as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. "What deal?" he demanded, voice pitched with desperation. "What are you talking about?" I turned to face him, the lights of the reception behind him casting a halo around his bewildered face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "The semiconductor contract," I said evenly. "The one your father-in-law pulled strings for. The one that was supposed to be the big win this quarter. Atlas Industries owns that contract." He blinked, the words not quite computing. "And I continued, own Atlas." For a long second, Logan just stood there, like a man trying to make sense of a foreign language spoken in his own house. "You," he finally said, "you're not supposed to be me?" I finished. "Supposed to be the joke? The dropout with a laptop?" Behind him, a few guests had followed. They lingered by the entrance, pretending to admire the garden lights, but I could see their ears twitching. "Phones out." Whispers spreading like wildfire. "You're lying," Logan said, but his voice had lost its edge. It trembled now. I kept my name off public filings. Uncle Cyrus was the face while I built the spine. You remember him, right? The quiet one who never said much at dinners? You all assumed he was some harmless retiree. He took a step back. The wheels in his head were finally catching up. I could see it. Every failed negotiation in the past 6 months, every delay from their trusted vendors, every merger they couldn't block because it came from names they didn't recognize. The entire chessboard had been rearranged behind his back. "You sabotaged us." "No," I corrected. "I outmaneuvered you. You built your career on inherited contacts and family handshakes. I built mine on data, grit, and knowing how to move without being seen." More guests trickled into the garden. I saw Celeste's father, Richard Preston, standing stiffly near the grapevines, his jaw clenched. The Prestons didn't like surprises, especially not public ones, especially not on their dime. Marissa appeared beside Logan. Her face was pale, lips pressed so tightly together they nearly disappeared. "What are you doing?" she whispered, but her voice quaked. "I'm answering the question you never thought to ask," I said. "Who I really am." Marissa shook her head like a person trying to undo a nightmare with motion. "This isn't the time. This isn't the place." "No," I said. "This is exactly the time. And exactly the place." Logan surged forward, anger returning like a second wind. "You think this makes you a king? You crashed a wedding and pulled a stunt." "It's not a stunt, Logan. This is business. Real business. The kind you only read about in Forbes, the kind you've never truly understood. Your company runs on chips supplied through contracts you no longer have. Your quarterly earnings are about to tank. Investors will start calling tomorrow. Then your board. Then your father-in-law." He staggered. Actually staggered. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. A commotion near the dance floor broke the moment. Someone had shown one of the groomsmen a breaking news alert. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Something like, "Atlas Industries terminates $50 million Preston tech supply deal mid-wedding." The timing wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. Marissa clutched Logan's arm. "He can't do this," she whispered, looking up at me with wild eyes. "Can he?" "Marissa," I said softly, "you spent a decade telling me to be more like Logan. Dress better. Network more. Kiss the right rings." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was heavier than anything she could say. "But you never saw what I was really doing," I added. "Because you weren't looking." Richard Preston made his way toward us, flanked by 2 advisors in black suits. His expression was a mix of fury and calculation. "You'll regret this," Logan spat. "You've destroyed a legacy." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I've exposed one." Richard stopped a few feet away, glancing from me to Logan to Marissa. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. I held up my phone, showing the Atlas logo, then tucked it back into my pocket. You can confirm it on Monday, but by then, your analyst will already be scrambling. Why now? He asked. I looked at Marissa, then at Logan, then at the sea of curious, blinking eyes gathering like moths around flame. Because you never asked who I was, I said. And I got tired of pretending I didn't matter. Security had arrived, unsure of what to do. Their earpieces buzzed. One stepped forward. Do you want him removed, sir? He asked Logan. But Logan didn't answer. Neither did Richard. Because even they realized this wasn't their decision anymore. I looked at the guard and smiled. You sure you want to escort out the man who holds half the debt on this estate? He froze. His eyes darted to Richard, who slowly shook his head. I adjusted my cufflinks, brushed past them, and made my way back into the ballroom. Not as a guest, not as the help, but as the man who just took their kingdom apart, quietly, surgically, and without raising a hand. The ballroom had shifted, not visibly, not in the decor, not in the arrangements, but something in the atmosphere had cracked, like a fault line splitting beneath marble floors. I stepped back inside and could feel it instantly. The music was still playing, but the notes were hollow. The clinks of champagne glasses sounded more like nerves than celebration. Conversations had gone quieter, sharper, the way people whisper when a car crash happens down the street, but the sound still echoes in their bones. I wasn't supposed to be the center of anything that day. I was meant to stand in the background, to play the polite husband, nod through introductions, smile during toasts, and pretend not to hear the jokes whispered behind crystal rims. But now every head that turned did so for me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the tremor that made the chandeliers swing. Marissa found me near the edge of the room, where the bar met the corridor. She was breathless, still in her heels, her lipstick slightly smudged. Her whole demeanor had changed. Gone was the distant queen of the morning, replaced now by a woman gripping the edges of control. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. I took a sip of my drink and looked down at her, taking off the mask. Her eyes darted around to see who was listening. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marissa, I said gently, look around. And she did. All around us, the facade was cracking. The bride's father was in a corner, jaw tight, speaking furiously into a phone. Logan's best man had vanished entirely. Celeste looked like someone had told her the yacht had been repossessed. Even the waitstaff seemed more tense, like they could feel the tectonic shift through the soles of their shoes. I didn't need a mic. I didn't need a scene. Truth does its own amplification. Marissa grabbed my wrist, pulling me aside toward the hallway near the restrooms. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. Why now? Why did that? I stared at her, and for a long second, I didn't see the woman I married. I saw the polished socialite her family had carved from stone. The one who'd coached herself into someone else's world and tried to pull me along like a pet project. The one who stopped saying we and started saying Logan would've. You really don't? I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She was searching for a script that no longer worked. I've listened for years, I said. Let them talk over me. Let them forget my name. You stood next to them while they did it. I protected you, she snapped. You think I didn't stand up for you? You laughed when they did, I said. You dressed me up to blend in. You never once asked if I liked being invisible. She looked down, ashamed or furious. I couldn't tell anymore. Maybe both. You could have told me, she said. I did, I said quietly. You just weren't listening. The hallway door swung open, and her father entered, flushed and sweating, followed by a man I recognized as his attorney. The elder Langford, James, was a man who rarely looked rattled. That day, he looked like a man seeing smoke in his vault. We need to speak. Now, he said. I looked at Marissa. You want to stay? She blinked. What? I'm done pretending, I said. But you're welcome to decide who you are. I walked past them both and returned to the ballroom. That's when the music stopped. The DJ, clearly informed by some frantic manager or relative, had cut the playlist early. A ripple of awkwardness spread through the room as guests checked their phones. The headline had hit the news feeds now. My bet was that it started as a whisper and landed as a siren. CEO revealed as silent owner of Atlas Industries during Preston wedding, $50M deal canceled mid-ceremony. I didn't need a press release. The truth had already gone viral. Her father followed me back into the ballroom, trying to keep his voice level. You blindsided us, he said. No, I replied. I walked through the front door. You just never bothered to check who was holding the keys. Do you know how this will look? Like the truth. I turned to face him fully. You all thought Power wore a tailored tux and smiled for photos. But Power is the man you ignore. The man who sits in the third row. The man your son mocks, your daughter barely defends. The one who listens. His jaw twitched. There's still time to fix this. I handed him a card. That's the number for my office. If your board wants to talk, they can call Monday. But you should know, every hour, this situation gets more expensive. The card burned in his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Security was called again, but this time, they hesitated. I watched one of the guards check a message on his phone, glance at me, and then slowly back away. He knew. They all did. The bride and groom emerged from a side room. Celeste's face was pale and pinched, her eyes shooting daggers at Logan, who now looked less like a groom and more like a man waking up inside a burning house. Logan's steps were slow, hesitant. He met my eyes across the floor. No words this time. Just a long, bitter look of someone who finally saw the shadow that had grown behind him for years. I didn't flinch. I stood in the middle of that ballroom and watched their empire begin to tremble. The decorations, the guests, the polite lies, all of it, unraveling thread by thread. And I didn't raise a finger, because real power? It doesn't roar. It arrives calmly and waits for silence. The ballroom had shifted, not visibly. Not in the decor, not in the arrangements, but something in the atmosphere had cracked, like a fault line splitting beneath marble floors. I stepped back inside and could feel it instantly. The music was still playing, but the notes were hollow. The clinks of champagne glasses sounded more like nerves than celebration. Conversations had gone quieter, sharper, the way people whisper when a car crash happens down the street, but the sound still echoes in their bones. I wasn't supposed to be the center of anything that day. I was meant to stand in the background, to play the polite husband, nod through introductions, smile during toasts, and pretend not to hear the jokes whispered behind crystal rims. But now every head that turned did so for me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the tremor that made the chandeliers swing. Marissa found me near the edge of the room, where the bar met the corridor. She was breathless, still in her heels, her lipstick slightly smudged. Her whole demeanor had changed. Gone was the distant queen of the morning, replaced now by a woman gripping the edges of control. "What the hell are you doing?" she hissed. I took a sip of my drink and looked down at her, taking off the mask. Her eyes darted around to see who was listening. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Marissa," I said gently, "look around." And she did. All around us, the facade was cracking. The bride's father was in a corner, jaw tight, speaking furiously into a phone. Logan's best man had vanished entirely. Celeste looked like someone had told her the yacht had been repossessed. Even the waitstaff seemed more tense, like they could feel the tectonic shift through the soles of their shoes. I didn't need a mic. I didn't need a scene. Truth does its own amplification. Marissa grabbed my wrist, pulling me aside toward the hallway near the restrooms. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "Why now? Why today?" I stared at her, and for a long second, I didn't see the woman I married. I saw the polished socialite her family had carved from stone. The one who'd coached herself into someone else's world and tried to pull me along like a pet project. The one who stopped saying "we" and started saying Logan would've. "You really don't?" I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She was searching for a script that no longer worked. "I've listened for years," I said. "Let them talk over me. Let them forget my name. You stood next to them while they did it. I protected you," she snapped. "You think I didn't stand up for you? You laughed when they did," I said. "You dressed me up to blend in. You never once asked if I liked being invisible." She looked down, ashamed or furious. I couldn't tell anymore. "Maybe both." "You could have told me," she said. "I did," I said quietly. "You just weren't listening." The hallway door swung open, and her father entered, flushed and sweating, followed by a man I recognized as his attorney. The elder Langford, James, was a man who rarely looked rattled. That day, he looked like a man seeing smoke in his vault. "We need to speak." "Now," he said. I looked at Marissa. "You want to stay?" She blinked. "What?" "I'm done pretending," I said. "But you're welcome to decide who you are." I walked past them both and returned to the ballroom. That's when the music stopped. The DJ, clearly informed by some frantic manager or relative, had cut the playlist early. A ripple of awkwardness spread through the room as guests checked their phones. The headline had hit the news feeds now. My bet was that it started as a whisper and landed as a siren. CEO revealed as silent owner of Atlas Industries during Preston wedding, $50M deal canceled mid-ceremony. I didn't need a press release. The truth had already gone viral. Her father followed me back into the ballroom, trying to keep his voice level. You blindsided us, he said. No, I replied. I walked through the front door. You just never bothered to check who was holding the keys. Do you know how this will look? Like the truth. I turned to face him fully. You all thought Power wore a tailored tux and smiled for photos. But Power is the man you ignore. The man who sits in the third row. The man your son mocks, your daughter barely defends. The one who listens. His jaw twitched. There's still time to fix this. I handed him a card. That's the number for my office. If your board wants to talk, they can call Monday. But you should know, every hour, this situation gets more expensive. The card burned in his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Security was called again, but this time, they hesitated. I watched one of the guards check a message on his phone, glance at me, and then slowly back away. He knew. They all did. The bride and groom emerged from a side room. Celeste's face was pale and pinched, her eyes shooting daggers at Logan, who now looked less like a groom and more like a man waking up inside a burning house. Logan's steps were slow, hesitant. He met my eyes across the floor. No words this time. Just a long, bitter look of someone who finally saw the shadow that had grown behind him for years. I didn't flinch. I stood in the middle of that ballroom and watched their empire begin to tremble. The decorations, the guests, the polite lies, all of it, unraveling thread by thread. And I didn't raise a finger. Because real power? It doesn't roar. It arrives calmly and waits for silence. The first headline hit before the wedding was over. I watched a woman in pearls gasp at her phone, show it to her husband, and then tuck it into her clutch like it might explode. The ripples spread across the ballroom in real time. Phones lighting up, conversations shifting from shallow small talk to tense murmurs. By the time Logan and Celeste returned from their awkward photo session by the vineyard, the world already knew. CEO crashes wedding with $50 million mic drop. Preston tech faces collapse after secret owner of Atlas Industries pulls plug. The quiet billionaire who was hiding in plain sight. They all had their own spin. But they told the same story. The man no one noticed had just pulled the rug out from beneath an entire legacy, and he didn't even raise his voice. I didn't stick around for the final speeches. I left quietly. No grand exit, no last words. I walked out through the front entrance while most of the guests were still reeling from the news, murmuring like gossips at a funeral. Some looked at me. A few nodded. One or two clapped, subtly, like they understood what they'd just witnessed. Marissa didn't follow me. She was still inside, probably trying to explain to her friends how this could have happened without her knowing. That was always the thing with her. She hated surprises unless she was the one throwing them. By Monday morning, Preston tech stock had dropped 11%. Investors panicked. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were requested. Damage control began before the coffee even brewed. And Logan? He disappeared from social media entirely. No more golf swing videos, no more rooftop views from corporate towers. Just silence. The board moved quickly, too quickly, if you asked me. They suspended him pending a strategic review. A polite way of saying, we're looking for a reason to toss you without setting off a lawsuit. Celeste's family pulled their PR firm into the mess, but even they couldn't rewrite what had happened. The footage was already online. The internet didn't care about their version. And Marissa? She waited a few days before confronting me. It was late. She came home from her parents' house without warning, standing in our living room like a stranger. She wasn't wearing designer anything. No earrings, no makeup. Just a simple sweater and the same look I saw when I first met her, before the world taught her how to pretend. You planned this, she said, not asking, stating. Yes. Her arms crossed, her eyes scanning me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. You humiliated my family. No, I said, standing. I revealed them. They're ruined. I stepped closer. They ruined themselves the moment they thought power only lived in their circle. The moment they laughed at a man trying to build something from nothing. The moment you stopped seeing me as your husband and started seeing me as the help. She looked away, jaw clenched. You could have warned me. I did, I said quietly. You just weren't listening. You never asked who I was becoming. You were too busy polishing your image to notice the man standing beside you. Silence filled the space between us like smoke. She exhaled slowly. We can fix this. No, I said. You mean hide this? There's nothing to fix. This is the truth, finally. Her eyes watered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. I stood by you. I shook my head. You stood beside me when it was convenient. But when your family laughed, you laughed too. When I succeeded, you stayed silent. And when I finally took control, you flinched. The tears came then quiet, frustrated ones. She tried to speak, but gave up halfway through the sentence. I filed for separation this morning, I added, gently. It's already with the lawyer. That broke something in her. You're destroying everything, she snapped. No. I replied, voice steady. I'm freeing myself from it. She left that night. Took nothing but her purse and a key I later found sitting on the marble counter. She didn't call, didn't text, and I didn't reach out. The next few weeks were strange. Quiet. My phone rang nonstop, reporters, investors, curious executives trying to figure out who I really was. I declined every interview. I had nothing to prove to strangers. The only calls I returned were the ones that mattered. My lawyer handled the divorce filing discreetly. There was little to split. The home was mine. The investments were shielded. She had access to a joint account, but I let it go. I didn't want her money. I wanted peace. She tried once, just once, to appeal to the past. She left a message late one night. We had something once. Before all of this. I played it once. Deleted it after. Because she was right. We had something once. But it wasn't this. And it wasn't now. My assistant walked in the next morning with an article in her hand. You've gone viral, she said, laughing lightly. People are calling you the polite avenger. I shrugged. They love a headline. But this one, she said. This one feels different. Like justice. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Justice wasn't what I wanted. Just clarity. Just honesty. Just the chance to stand in a room full of people who never saw me, and finally let them look. And now? Now they saw everything. The first place I went after filing the paperwork wasn't a lawyer's office. It wasn't some glass-walled boardroom or coastal retreat. It was my mother's house. She still lived in the same one-story, sun-drenched bungalow she and my father bought in the 80s, back when hope could be financed with grit and a handshake. The lawn was overgrown, and the mailbox leaned a little to the left, but the smell of warm bread still greeted you at the door. So did the creak in the floorboards near the kitchen table. When she opened the door, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me for a long second, and then pulled me into one of those hugs only mothers know how to give, tight, unfiltered, and filled with a language no one else speaks. She stepped back, gave me a once-over. You look tired. I nodded. I've been busy. She motioned for me to come in, and I followed the scent of cinnamon and old wood into the kitchen. A pot of tea was already on the stove, and 2 chipped mugs sat beside a plate of ginger cookies. I hadn't even called ahead. I saw the news, she said, settling into her chair, hands folded. You made quite the splash. I smiled. That wasn't the plan. Just the result. She poured the tea, no rush in her movements, no judgment in her tone. And Marissa? Gone. She sipped. Good. I chuckled. That quick. She raised an eyebrow. She always talked too much for someone who saw so little. We sat in silence for a few moments. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. The wind rustled the trees like they were whispering secrets only the old understood. She really didn't know, my mother asked. No, none of them did. That's how I wanted it for a while. She gave me a look I knew well. You always did like keeping your cards close. Even as a boy, you'd hide your drawings under your mattress. I looked down at the steam rising from my mug. It stopped being about hiding. It became about control. And now, I looked her in the eyes. Now it's about truth. She leaned back and nodded. Then good. Truth makes fewer meals but better company. I laughed softly at that. Leave it to my mother to distill everything down to wisdom and biscuits. She tilted her head, studying me. So what happens next? You going to build something new? I've already started, I said. Different this time. Leaner. More personal. I don't want legacy. I want clarity. She grinned. Finally realized legacy's just a dusty frame people use to hang their egos. That, I said, and I'm tired of feeding people who only eat with silver spoons. We didn't talk about Marissa after that. Not because it hurt, but because there was nothing left to say. The woman who once held my hand through dreams had tightened her grip only when I started shining brighter than she'd expected. My phone buzzed around noon with a message from Cyrus. Logan had reached out, not as a brother-in-law, not as an enemy, but as a man with no real place left to land. He's lost, Cyrus had written, but not stupid. I stared at the message for a while. Then I replied, "Give him a number. Low pay. Entry level. Let's see if humility suits him." Later that week, Logan accepted the offer. He arrived on a Monday morning at the satellite office of one of Atlas's smaller partners. No assistants, no corner suite, no fanfare. He wore a shirt too expensive for the role and a face too proud for the chair he was assigned. But he showed up. Day one. No skipping the line. No backdoors. Cyrus sent me a picture of Logan sitting at a plain desk with a borrowed laptop and a reusable water bottle someone handed him at the front. He made a pot of coffee. The caption read, "Good. Let him sit there. Let him work. Let him learn that not all success has a back door." Marissa, meanwhile, moved back in with her parents. I didn't ask for updates, but the internet never sleeps. A distant cousin of hers posted a story. No driver, no invites, no gala appearances. Just her in a faded hoodie, walking into a boutique alone. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply turned off the phone. My world was quieter now. Not empty. Just intentional. I spent more time at my mother's house in the weeks that followed. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. We just sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, our chairs rocking in unison, our lives finally synced again. One day, I brought her a framed photo. It was a simple shot. Me, standing outside the Preston estate that day, holding the card that read Staff Overflow, Table 19. She looked at it, squinted, then laughed out loud. "You framing this?" she asked. "I already did." She nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of history worth hanging." And so I did. In my new office, smaller than the last, but all mine, the framed card hangs right above my desk. Not as a trophy, not as revenge, but as a reminder that the table they gave me may have been meant for the help. But I left owning the building. I wasn't surprised when James Langford walked into my office. Just surprised it took him that long. 3 months had passed since the wedding. Long enough for the headlines to shift, for new scandals to rise and fall. But some damage doesn't fade with news cycles. Preston Tech had survived, barely. They'd patched the hole I left, but the ship still leaked. And now, the captain had come knocking. He wore a charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, though it hung heavier than before. The glint of assurance in his eyes had dulled. His tie was too tight, or maybe he just couldn't breathe right in a building he didn't control. He didn't announce himself. No assistant. No calendar invite. Just showed up, asked for a few minutes, and was sent through. My receptionist recognized him instantly but said nothing. Just nodded him in and closed the door behind him with the kind of click that made you realize a different world now sat on the other side. He didn't sit. Not yet. Just stood there, glancing around the space. "Nice office," he said finally. "Not bad for a dropout, huh?" I replied. That made him pause, but only for a second. "I was hoping we could talk." "You are." He cleared his throat. "About Preston Tech." I assumed. A long silence followed. He shifted his weight from one polished shoe to the other. Finally, he lowered himself into the seat across from mine and folded his hands, like he was giving a deposition. "Our company's bleeding," he admitted. "The damage from the canceled contract, it triggered a domino effect. We lost a few investors. One key client. Staff morale's in the basement." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch, watched him squirm in the chair where so many others had begged for partnerships. "Deals. Rescue. We need help," he said at last. "Strategic input. Liquidity. Maybe even a bridge loan to you." I stopped him there, raising one hand slowly. "You came to me," I said, "for help? After everything." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Yes." "Interesting," I murmured. I opened a drawer, pulled out a plain folder, and laid it on the table between us. He eyed it like it might bite. "What's that?" "Options," I said. "Rebuilding plans. Streamlined restructuring proposals. Exit paths that don't end in headlines." "You've already prepared these?" he asked. I smiled. "James, I started preparing these the moment you called me, just a tech guy, over dinner 5 years ago." He didn't touch the folder. He stared at it, then at me. "There's no handout in there," I continued. "No golden parachute. What's in there are actual programs, ones I've developed for smaller firms, struggling innovators, and even legacy core that forgot how to evolve." "And you're offering them to me?" he asked, disbelief crawling into his voice. "I'm offering you the same thing I offered them. Structure, not favors." He reached slowly for the folder and opened it. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the pages. It was all there, graphs, terms, options for asset reallocation, proposals for tech integration, cost-cutting measures that didn't bleed out the future. "No one's going to know we came to you," he asked, voice low. "Unless you give them a reason to," I said. "I don't trade in shame. Just accountability." He closed the folder but didn't speak. The weight of his pride sat heavy between us. "You thought power was about appearance," I said, voice calm. "And I'll let you think that. For years. Because I needed time. But now, you're in my building. Sitting in my chair. Asking for my help. That's not revenge. That's a circle closing." He looked up then. For a moment, I saw something rare in his eyes. Respect. Hard-earned. Late. But real. "I underestimated you," he said. "You all did," I replied. "But that's why I won't give you a bailout. Because I know what that does to people like you." He nodded slowly. "And Logan? Working?" His brows rose. I gave him a desk and a laptop. If he wants to earn something, he'll learn how. James stood, folder in hand. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the company. For the workers you'd toss aside to save your name." He hesitated at the door. "You're not cruel." "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I'm surgical." He left with a bowed head. After he was gone, I stood and walked to the framed place card hanging on the wall. "Staff overflow, table 19. The words still gleamed under the glass. It used to sting. It used to remind me of humiliation. Now it reminded me of power. Not the kind people parade. The kind that waits, listens, builds. Later that evening, I walked through the city streets, coat collar turned up, watching the lights blink in office windows above. Every one of those towers held someone like I used to be, overlooked, underestimated, working behind the scenes. The difference was, I had walked through fire and came out holding the blueprint. Now, even the kings came knocking. And I didn't need to open the door. I already owned the floor. The place card still hangs above my desk, centered, framed in black walnut, preserved like a fossil of who I used to be and what they thought I was. Staff overflow, table 19. They wrote it with calligraphy. Gold ink, thick paper, curled edges. Classy. Elegant. Insulting in a way only the rich know how to deliver. Not crude. Just dismissive. Thoughtful, even, if you think of cattle herding as thoughtful. I stared at that card a long time before I had it framed. Not out of anger. Not bitterness. But recognition. That table was meant for the help. The ignored. The ones they barely thanked for passing the salt. I sat at that table once. And I left owning the building. It's poetic, sure. The kind of line that gets turned into Instagram quotes or LinkedIn motivational posts. But it's more than that. It's proof that real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. And when the moment's right, it doesn't strike, it simply moves, and the whole board shifts around it. People used to tell me that I was too quiet, too soft-spoken for business, that I didn't demand enough attention, didn't own the room the way Logan did. He had swagger, volume, a polished smile. I had notebooks and silence. But silence is a ledger. It records everything. The day I first stepped into Marissa's world, I told myself I could endure it, that I could bend, compromise, adapt for love, for peace, for the long game. I sat at those family dinners swallowing half-baked jabs and full-bodied arrogance. Her father calling me a young dreamer. Her mother saying I had good intentions, but no pedigree. Logan tossing napkins at me like I was an intern. And Marissa? She smiled through it all. Said it was just how her family was. Asked me not to make a fuss. Said they'd respect me when I made it. But what she never realized was I had already made it. I just didn't need to wear it like a costume. My success didn't come with confetti. It came with quiet late nights, failed prototypes, cold pizza, and deals negotiated in sweatshirts, not suits. I made choices in those shadows. Strategic ones. I stayed off interviews. Declined magazine features. Built my empire under different names, through shell companies and trusted proxies like Uncle Cyrus, until the architecture of Atlas Industries looked like it came from nowhere. Because I was nowhere. Because I was everywhere they didn't think to look. They mocked what they didn't understand. And that was their mistake. In the months since the wedding, the world changed. For them. For me. Logan, now working entry-level in a firm he once dismissed as background noise, sends weekly reports with no complaints. He hasn't asked for a raise, a favor, or a shortcut. Maybe that's growth. Maybe it's survival. Either way, he's learning. Marissa hasn't called. Not once. I'm not sure if that's her pride or her punishment. Perhaps both. I heard from someone that she tried moving out on her own but ended up back in her parents' guest house. The same house where they used to toast champagne to Logan's deals and call me the one who dabbled in tech. I've moved forward. I spend my time with people who don't need to be impressed to be respectful. With builders, creators, quiet minds. I started mentoring again. Not publicly. I meet young entrepreneurs in the early stages, the ones eating instant noodles at midnight while debugging code, the ones who don't yet know how powerful they already are. I tell them the truth. You don't have to be loud to be dangerous. I keep the place card above my desk because it reminds me what most forget, titles or decorations. Power is leverage. And dignity? That's not handed to you. You claim it. Quietly. Firmly. Without begging. I remember walking through the Preston estate that day, past the marble staircases and gilded mirrors. Every inch of that place told a story of inherited wealth. But none of it prepared them for someone like me. A man who had nothing to prove, but everything to reclaim. They wanted me to stay in the kitchen. The background. The overflow. But the thing about the kitchen is, that's where the fire lives. That's where the heat comes from. That's where things are made, broken down, tested, refined. While they toasted champagne, I was learning how to wield flame. Now, I don't wait for permission to speak. I write the agenda. I've kept my company private. No press tours. No exposés. Just action. We've launched 2 new initiatives focused on education and microloans for underrepresented founders. Not as charity. As investment. I don't want to rescue people. I want to equip them. And every time someone sits across from me, nervous, hopeful, underdressed by society's standards, I smile. Because I've been them. Because I am them. I had dinner last week with my mother again. Same kitchen. Same tea. She noticed the watch I was wearing and asked if it was new. It's old, I told her. Just finally fits. She smiled and said, good. Some things take time. That's all this was. Time. Patience. Precision. I stood in the shadows long enough. Long enough for them to forget I had a match. And now? Now they eat at tables I own. And I sit wherever I damn well please. It's strange how silence can feel loud. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the room. It presses on your skin, gets under your clothes, and coils around your spine like a whisper you're not supposed to hear. That's what my birthday dinner felt like. We were seated at the long mahogany table in the private lounge of a high-end restaurant that Mira insisted on booking. Candlelight flickered between us like little flames trying to warn me. I should have seen it then. But I smiled. I played the role. Happy birthday to me. Everyone was there. Mira, dressed in soft gold with her smile just a little too perfect. My sister Marcy with her nose in her glass. My parents on either side of me. My cousin Nina, fake laughing at everything Silas said. And Silas himself, my older brother, charming as always, lounging in the seat right next to my wife, as if it had been reserved just for him. And maybe it had. He looked like he just came back from vacation. Fresh tan. Teeth too white. Watch flashing under the dimmed lights like it had something to say. I knew that watch. I bought it. Or rather, my credit card had. The charge was small enough to pass as one of Myra's random gifts for someone. But it hadn't been for me. I sat there, surrounded by people who shared my blood, shared my table, but not my loyalty. I could feel it in the way Mira leaned towards Silas, in the way he brushed her fingers when reaching for the wine. No one said anything. No one needed to. They weren't hiding it anymore. They were easing me into the role of the fool. And I'd had enough of pretending. The waiter poured my wine. I barely touched it. I was watching Myra's hands. The way they rested just so on her napkin. Relaxed. Confident. The hands of a woman who thought she'd already won. The room dimmed just a little more. My father stood up, glass in hand. I expected him to say something like, "Happy birthday, son," or "proud of you." Something a father should say. Something mine never really did. Instead, he said, "Let's raise a glass to maturity." I didn't blink. Didn't flinch. I just kept watching. My sister chimed in, to modern arrangements and letting go of outdated ideas. There was laughter. Forced. Nervous. As if they knew they were crossing a line, but figured I'd be too stunned, or too polite, to stop them. Then Mira stood. She turned to me, taking my hand gently, as if her touch could smooth over the nail she'd hammered in. "We think it's time," she said softly, "that you stop being so traditional." I blinked. Just once. Then I smiled. I looked up, and I gave the signal. It was small. Just 2 fingers brushing my cufflink. Nobody in the family noticed. But 4 of the waiters did. Because they weren't waiters. In less than 10 seconds, the temperature of the room changed. The kind of shift you can't quite name but everyone feels. Like a storm arriving without thunder. One by one, the waiters stepped forward. Calm. Steady. No plates. No menus. Enzo, the lead, stepped beside me and said clearly but respectfully, "Mr. Walsh, would you like us to proceed?" I nodded. That was when Myra's smile faltered. She looked at Enzo, then back at me. "What's going on?" I didn't answer her. Not yet. The lights dimmed again, this time not for mood, but for purpose. The projector screen lowered slowly from the ceiling, smooth as silk, casting a ghostly glow across the table. "What is this?" Silas asked, trying to laugh. "Some kind of movie?" My cousin looked uncomfortable. My mother started whispering something to my father. But no one moved. No one stopped it. Because deep down, they knew this was no birthday surprise. This was the curtain rising. Myra's hand slipped from mine. The first image appeared. Not a slideshow of childhood photos or fond memories. No. This was a freeze frame, Mira and Silas, sitting side by side at the vineyard's cabin porch. Her legs over his. A moment of intimacy caught in perfect clarity. Someone gasped. Then the screen went dark again, only to show a short video clip. Myra's voice echoed through the room. "He still has no clue. Sometimes I think he likes being blind." My mother stood abruptly. "Turn this off. This isn't appropriate." But no one moved. And I certainly didn't. I stood slowly, adjusted my sleeves, and looked around at the faces that used to mean something to me. Then I looked at Mira. "You wanted me to be more open-minded," I said softly. "You wanted me to accept the new definition of marriage, of love, of loyalty." Her eyes were wide now. The same eyes that used to cry when I held her during thunderstorms. The same eyes that now held panic instead of guilt. "You all wanted to toast to maturity," I continued. "To evolution. And I was expected to sit quietly and smile like a good little husband." Silas pushed back his chair. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said sharply. "You're used to getting away with things because no one ever calls you out. Because you think money gives you immunity. Because this family made excuses for you your whole life." Silas opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "I loved you both," I said. "But I will never love a lie." Then I turned to the rest of them. Tonight wasn't a celebration. It was a performance. And I gave you all front row seats. The room stayed frozen. Not one person clapped. Not one person spoke. I leaned down, picked up the envelope Enzo handed me, and slid it across the table to Mira. Inside were divorce papers. Pre-signed. Ironclad. She didn't open them. Just stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. Then I turned to Silas. "You'll find your surprise in the envelope your lawyer receives tomorrow." No one moved. I turned toward the door. "I'm done," I said. And I walked out, leaving behind the candles, the cake, and the illusion of family. The lie was broken. And finally, so was I. But not in the way they'd hoped. I didn't break down. I broke free. The scent hit me first. It was a mix of bergamot, musk, and something faintly smoky, something expensive. Something not mine. It clung to her like a second skin, floating through the hallway when she walked in, seeping into the cushions of the couch as she dropped her purse and kicked off her heels like she'd had the longest day in the world. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, barely grazing skin, and smiled that tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Traffic was insane," she said, loosening her scarf. "I need a shower." I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee I no longer wanted, watching her, listening. That smelled, God, it wouldn't let go. And I knew exactly where I'd smelled it before. Silas. His cologne. It was the one he wore to every family event, always so strong it lingered in the air long after he'd left, like a signature. I remembered once complimenting it just to be polite. He said it cost more than my rent. I never forgot that. Now here it was. On her. On Mira. I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to know more before I spoke. I needed to be sure. I couldn't accuse her, not yet. Not based on perfume and paranoia. So I swallowed my anger. Let it burn quietly down my throat like cheap whiskey. And I smiled. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded without looking at me. "Just tired. I'll be upstairs." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a long time after the shower started, listening to the water run, imagining her scrubbing him off her skin, imagining her humming as if nothing was wrong. I poured my coffee down the sink and opened a window. The air was too thick to breathe. That night, I lay next to her in bed. Her back was to me, her body curled around a pillow. I watched the ceiling, heard the steady tick of the clock, counted every second between her breaths. I knew, but knowing wasn't proof. Not yet. The next few days were a blur of silence and small talk. I became a man split in two, the one who smiled over dinner and asked about her day, and the one who checked her phone when she was in the shower, who traced her steps with quiet obsession. I wasn't proud of it. But betrayal changes something in a man. It rots the foundation of trust, makes you start seeing cracks in every wall you once leaned on. Then came the laugh. We were sitting in the living room. She was on the couch scrolling through her phone. I was pretending to read, but I wasn't seeing any of the words. Just listening. Always listening. Suddenly, she giggled, sharp and sudden. The kind of laugh she used to have around me. The kind that used to make me feel like I'd said something brilliant. "What's funny?" I asked casually. She looked up like she forgot I was even there. "Oh, it's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just Silas sent me a stupid meme." "A meme?" "Silas." She smiled down at the phone again, typing something fast with her thumbs. I watched her screen tilt slightly toward her chest as if by instinct. The next morning, I checked our shared cloud storage. We had an old habit of syncing photos and backups from our phones. Most of it was innocent groceries, screenshots of articles, selfies. But tucked between two food pics was a photo of Mira and Silas at a vineyard. My vineyard. It was mine. The one I had inherited from my grandfather. A quiet little patch of land I'd been trying to restore on weekends. Mira said she hated going. Said it was too far, too rustic. And there she was. In a sundress I'd never seen. Silas's arm draped lazily around her shoulders. She was laughing. He was staring straight into the camera like he owned the whole world. It made my stomach twist. And still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than instinct. I needed certainty. I needed something they couldn't deny or explain away. So I made a call to the only person I trusted without question, Cyrus. My best friend since we were 12. The one who had seen me through every bad haircut, every failed job interview, every family disaster. He didn't ask questions when I said I needed help. "I need proof," I told him. He just said, "What's the budget?" I told him there wasn't one. He put me in touch with someone. A man named Enzo, ex-private security. Quiet, precise, and thorough. He didn't blink when I told him what I suspected. Within 3 days, I had access to footage. Audio recordings. GPS logs. Hotel receipts. And the truth hit me harder than I thought it would. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was a full-blown, deliberate betrayal, woven into weeks, maybe months, of planning and secrecy. There were calls, long calls between Mira and Silas. There were transfers from our joint account to a private one I didn't recognize. There were photos of them together in places I never knew they went. One clip in particular stayed with me. It was Silas's voice, smug and careless. "She thinks he's too soft to notice." Honestly, I do too. Then Mira replied, laughing, "He's like a loyal dog. He won't bite even if you kick him." My hand shook playing that one. I replayed it. Once. Twice. 10 times. Then I stopped. Not because I couldn't handle it, but because I had what I needed. The truth. Not just of the betrayal, but of how little they thought of me. Of how long this must have been going on. And worst of all, that it wasn't just them. Because slowly, painfully, I began to see the cracks in everyone else. My father brushing off my questions. My sister saying things like, "Well, Mira does have needs." Even my mother, my own mother, once joked, "Silas and Mira have great chemistry. You should be grateful she's not bored." It wasn't just a betrayal between two people. It was a betrayal sanctioned by the very people who were supposed to protect me. Family. Blood. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like a strategist. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and I began to plan. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to see what I saw, feel what I felt. Not in anger, but in silence. In undeniable, crystal clear silence. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the space where power gathers. And I was done being soft. It's a strange thing, pretending to be blind when your eyes are wide open. Every smile I gave her after that night felt like a mask I had to staple to my face. Every dinner, every casual conversation, every "I love you" she whispered in passing, I took it, nodded, and stored it away like a receipt I'd one day need to present in court. Mira had no idea I knew. And that gave me the one advantage I'd never had before: control. I had spent years shrinking around Silas. Years of being the quiet one, the sensible one, the brother who was supposed to be grateful he was even allowed at the table. But something broke when I heard that recording of her laughing about me being a loyal dog. Something sharp woke up inside me, and it was done playing fetch. I didn't want to confront them in a hallway. That would be too easy. I didn't want screaming or furniture thrown. No, I wanted the truth served cold, carefully plated, in front of every fork and napkin they used to mock me behind. So I decided their stage would become my theater. The performance would take place on my 37th birthday. Mira had already been planning it, of course. She loved throwing events, not because she enjoyed celebration, but because it gave her the spotlight. She said we needed something classy but intimate. She meant something expensive. A place where people would talk, post photos, compliment her taste in lighting and canapes. I let her talk through the venue options, pretended to be indecisive, until she chose the restaurant I had already bought shares in 2 months ago. That part made me laugh quietly. She sent out invitations. A guest list with all the usual suspects. My parents, my sister, my cousin Nina. Silas. Always Silas. She even added his name with a winking emoji in the group chat. Of course the golden boy has to be there. I gave her a thumbs up. She kissed my cheek. You're being so chill about this. Growth looks good on you. Growth. That word again. The same word my father had used in his ridiculous toast. Growth didn't look good on me. It looked dangerous on me. I had already contacted Cyrus by then. Told him I needed surveillance footage, phone backups, and something more, theatrical. He didn't ask questions. Just replied, "You want drama? Let's write a script they'll never forget." We met in person at a late-night diner. The kind of place that didn't ask why two men were hunched over a notebook sketching out social warfare over cold coffee. "You want them all exposed?" Cyrus asked. "Not all at once," I replied. "Let them feel it unravel, piece by piece, like fabric tearing." I handed him a printed list. At the top was Silas, then Mira, then my mother, then the rest. I want roles filled, quiet ones, people who can blend in, waitstaff, bartenders, security. I want footage. I want reaction shots. I want to own that room before they even walk in. He nodded slowly. "You're planning a takedown, not a breakup." I didn't smile. They planned it first. Over the next 2 weeks, I became two people. By day, I was the husband Mira believed she'd tamed. I complimented her dresses. I pretended not to notice how she changed her phone passcode. I nodded when she said Silas was just helping with the guest list logistics. By night, I was something else entirely. I met with Enzo, the retired detective Cyrus had introduced me to. He was blunt and efficient, and he didn't like small talk. I liked that about him. "I've got audio, video, account links," he said one night, handing me a flash drive in a paper envelope. "Do you want it all laid out?" "Yes," I said, sliding the drive into my jacket pocket. "I want it chronological. I want timestamps. I want to build a case they can't weasel out of." He nodded. "Then I'll need access to her email. You'll have it by morning." And I made sure he did. While Mira slept beside me, I unlocked her phone with the Face ID she'd forgotten was still synced to our backup. I logged into her email on my device. Sent the credentials to Enzo. Deleted my tracks. Then I watched her sleep. The soft rise and fall of her breath. The lips that used to say my name like it meant something. I wondered who she was dreaming about. Silas, probably. Maybe about the future she thought she'd have once I was pushed aside quietly. I didn't feel rage in that moment. Just a hollow ache. Like something had been stolen and replaced with cold air. But I wasn't here to cry. I was here to prepare. Every detail of the party became a chess piece. The table arrangement? I changed it through the restaurant manager I now controlled. The lighting? Adjusted to allow for perfect video clarity. The music? Timed for breaks when key footage would play. Even the dessert menu became part of the game. Mira had chosen chocolate souffle. I replaced it with something bitter, dark, symbolic. Then I began inviting my own guests. People no one recognized. A lawyer, a silent videographer, a financial auditor, all posing as friends from work or distant cousins. Each of them given roles. Each of them carrying a copy of the truth. By the time Mira printed place cards and double-checked floral arrangements, I had already rewritten the ending to her story. She thought she was planning a celebration. I was planning an execution. A soft one. Elegant. Dignified. The kind that hurts more than shouting ever could. It's funny how often they called me weak. Because I didn't yell. Because I forgave easily. Because I showed up when no one else did. But silence isn't softness. And kindness is not permission. I waited. I played along. I let her pick the wine. Let her rehearse the toast she thought she'd give about modern love and maturity. And as she ordered a fresh suit for me, I was having custom documents printed on fine linen paper. One for her. One for Silas. One for every person who dared raise a glass while spitting in mine. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was a reckoning. And the best part? She handed me the stage herself. You ever sit in a room full of people and realize you're the only one who doesn't know the joke? That was me. Not once. Not twice. But for months. Every gathering. Every family dinner. Every weekend brunch where Mira casually disappeared for an hour to call her mother. Every time Silas showed up uninvited and everyone acted like it was just coincidence. It was never a coincidence. It was coordination. I didn't start connecting the pieces until a night in early March, when my cousin Nina came over to borrow a wine opener. She always forgot hers, or at least pretended to. She was tipsy before she arrived, laughing at things I didn't say. I was too glossy to notice how tired I'd become from pretending I didn't notice anything. I saw Mira and Silas at the vineyard the other day, she said, pulling off her heels the way drunk people do, clumsily and like it's a rebellion. You guys doing some kind of wine tasting thing now? My body went still. The vineyard? I asked carefully. She nodded, flopping onto our couch. Yeah, your place in Sonoma. Mira was wearing that long blue dress. Looked like a magazine shoot. Silas said you were meeting them later. I didn't say anything, because I wasn't. I never even knew she'd been there. Nina didn't even catch it. She just kept scrolling on her phone, humming to herself, blissfully unaware that she'd just handed me another piece of the puzzle. That night, after she left, I went into our shared Dropbox account. Mira and I used to upload vacation photos, house remodel ideas. There it was. That same blue dress. That same vineyard. A picture of Mira standing next to Silas in front of the wooden tasting deck I had hand-built myself. Silas's arm was around her waist. Her hand was on his chest. The caption? Golden Hour. It wasn't public. Just saved quietly in the archive, like a memory they didn't want to share but couldn't quite delete. And that's when it hit me. They weren't hiding it. They didn't have to, because everyone already knew. Everyone except me. I started testing the waters after that, asking casual questions. Innocent things, phrased gently so I didn't spook anyone. At dinner with my mother, I said, "You think Myra's been spending too much time with Silas?" She stirred her tea, not even blinking. She just needs someone more stimulating. That was it. No denial. No surprise. Just a tiny little stab, slipped between the words, delivered like it was her way of saying, "We expected this." And that word, stimulating, that didn't come from nowhere. That was something she'd heard Mira say. Or Silas. Or both. The next morning, I called my father. Said I wanted to talk business. We met for coffee downtown. He looked tired, like he always does when he knows he has to tolerate me for more than 10 minutes. "I'm thinking about selling part of the vineyard," I said, watching his expression closely. He didn't react, just sipped his espresso and said, "You should ask Silas first. He's been more involved lately." More involved? Right. I nodded, pretending like that made sense. "Do you think Myra's helping him with that?" My father shrugged. "They're adults. Don't get insecure about it." That was the phrase that broke something. Don't get insecure about it. Like the problem wasn't betrayal. It was my ego. That night, I went home and didn't speak a word to Mira. She didn't notice. She was on the phone with someone, probably him, laughing in that breathy, soft way she used to laugh when we were still new. I sat in my office and stared at the framed photo of our wedding. Funny how everyone in the picture had been complicit. My sister, Marcy, who used to call me every week, now only texted when she needed something. She'd once joked at brunch, "Mira and Silas could pass as models together, huh?" I thought it was just teasing. Now I realized it was foreshadowing. Even my best man, Joel, had said something at the wedding, something that felt harmless at the time. "Silas seems to really like Mira. Hope he doesn't steal her one day." Everyone laughed. Except me. And now I realized why. They weren't joking. They were easing me into the story they'd already written without me. So I stopped asking questions. Stopped pretending I was part of the club. And I started writing my own story. You ever sit in a room and realize everyone there would rather protect a liar than speak the truth? That's when you learn what loneliness really feels like. But something else came with it. Clarity. They thought I was small, quiet, forgiving, gullible. They didn't know I used to run a company with over 200 employees, that I managed 5 international accounts, that I had read hundreds of contracts, caught dozens of hidden clauses, and negotiated mergers that made millionaires out of people who now pretended I wasn't worth listening to. So I stopped being the husband, and I started being the man they underestimated. I cut the smiles, cut the babe, do you want tea? Tone. I gave Mira exactly what she wanted. Space. I let her plan her little dinner. Let her believe I was healing. Let her imagine a future where I quietly accepted whatever arrangement she and Silas had cooked up in their vineyard of lies. But every day, I was building. Not just a case. A mirror. One big, crystal-clear mirror they wouldn't be able to shatter or ignore. Every person who looked me in the eyes and chose silence over truth was going to see themselves in it. And when it was time, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't throw fists. I'd just hold it up, let them watch their own reflection twist in shame, and walk away. Because the only thing crueler than betrayal is being forgotten by the one you once controlled. And I was done being controlled. I was going to turn their favorite lie into their most public memory. There's something sacred about silence when you're building something in secret. I stopped trying to get their approval. Stopped chasing explanations. I stopped asking why Mira did it. Why Silas did it. Why my parents let it happen. I stopped needing anything from any of them. Because I had something more powerful now. Evidence. It didn't scream. It didn't weep. It didn't lie. It just existed, clean, cold, undeniable. The folder I named Truth sat on my encrypted drive like a sleeping beast. And every night, I fed it. I fed it screenshots, bank transfers, surveillance clips, audio files. I didn't even flinch anymore when I heard Myra's voice on those recordings, soft and sweet, telling Silas, he's so easy to manage. Or when Silas laughed and said, you'll be rid of him soon enough. They didn't know I had a PI with motion-triggered cams hidden at the vineyard cabin. They didn't know I knew Myra's burner phone password. They didn't know that their private texts had been auto-forwarding to a backup account for months. The folder didn't just contain betrayal. It documented how deeply they underestimated me. There was a receipt for a $12,000 watch Silas now wore, the one I saw sparkle under the restaurant lights at a family dinner. But using my joint account, Mira had labeled it gift for vendor. Vendor. I guess in her eyes, Silas was just another transaction. There were emails from my father's office, wired directly to Myra's shell business. Consulting fees, the memo said. But Mira hadn't consulted on anything in her life unless you count manipulating every room she walked into. They'd been paying her to stay quiet, to help Silas keep control of the vineyard, of the family image, of me. But what none of them realized was, while they were building a fantasy, I was documenting a conspiracy. And I wasn't going to expose them in court. That would have been too kind. I was going to do it at dinner. On my birthday. At the table they were dressing up like a trophy case. They wanted wine and toast and soft laughter. I'd give them wine. And I'd burn every lie with a toast of my own. It started with a call to a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Victor Lau, contract lawyer, high-functioning genius, and the only man I'd ever seen bring a CEO to tears with just 3 lines in a boardroom. I emailed him a fraction of the folder. Just the money trail and the surveillance footage. He called me 20 minutes later. What do you want? He asked. I leaned back in my chair. I want to bury them in the truth. He chuckled darkly. Then you're going to need 2 things. A paper trail so tight it could hang a judge, and a venue. I have both. Then I'll be there, he said. And I'll bring a few friends. Next was securing the location. Mira thought she picked the restaurant. She hadn't. I bought it. Not all of it, of course. Just a controlling share in the holding company that leased the venue. All done through a proxy firm. They still listed the same name on the papers, so she didn't blink when the confirmation came through. She just smiled and told me, I'm glad you're letting me take the lead on this. I nodded. It's your party. But it wasn't. It was mine. She just didn't know the guest of honor was going to be the truth. The week before the dinner, I finalized the layout. The table was long and narrow, good for sightlines. Projector installed behind the bar. Hidden cables. Remote setup. Each chair tagged with a small silver envelope, slipped beneath the napkins. Each envelope contained a curated truth, tailored to the recipient. My father's envelope? Wire receipts in the memo he signed approving them. My mother's? A typed transcript of her voice during a brunch I secretly recorded, where she said, if Mira finds happiness with Silas, is it really cheating? My sister's envelope contained screenshots of her text messages mocking me to Mira, calling me emotionally slow and too loyal to notice. Even Nina got one. A flash drive with the video of her vineyard comment, followed by audio from another night where she called me a background character in his own life. Everyone would be seated, everyone would be served, and everyone would learn the truth with dessert. But the most delicate package was for Mira. I stared at that one the longest. It contained the timeline, the full layout of the affair, from the first secret message to the first shared hotel room, the receipts, the cabin video stills, her voice on a call to Silas saying, once he signs over the vineyard, we'll ghost him. And finally, a copy of the divorce agreement. Signed, notarized, bulletproof, with a clause freezing all her access to assets pending fraud review. The last page? A letter I wrote. Just one paragraph. You didn't just betray our marriage. You betrayed my silence. And that was the last thing holding this family together. Happy birthday to me. I sealed it, stamped it, placed it on her side of the table. There was only one task left. The staff. They had to be perfect. Cyrus delivered. Every server was vetted. Some were actors. Some were former private contractors. One was a litigation videographer. They all looked the part. Polished, efficient, unthreatening. But every tray they carried, every glass they poured, every napkin they folded, it was all theater. The waiter pouring Silas's wine was also carrying the mini projector remote in his pocket. The hostess who welcomed guests at the door? She was the one who would dim the lights when I gave the signal. And Enzo? He'd be in the corner, silent, calm, carrying a USB that mirrored the folder on my drive. Redundant copies, fail-safes, proof locked in 7 places. By the night before the dinner, everything was in place. I sat alone in the study, sipping a whiskey I'd saved for something meaningful. The room was quiet. The city outside was glowing in soft yellows and blues. Mira was upstairs on the phone. I didn't care who it was anymore. I just sat there, letting the silence settle. Not out of sadness, but peace. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself again. Not the husband. Not the shadow behind Silas. Not the joke they whispered about. Just me. And when the folder called Truth was finally complete, I renamed the backup. I called it his last gift. Because that's what it was. The last thing I'd ever give Mira. The chance to look at the man she thought was blind. And realize he'd been wide awake the whole time. Forgiveness. That was the word she used. I'm so glad you forgave me, Mira whispered one evening, curling her fingers around my wrist like she was clinging to something gentle. Not everyone would be so open-minded. I nodded slowly, letting the warmth of her hand sit on my skin like frost. Cold, even when it looked like affection. I just told her what she wanted to hear. That I'd grown. That I wanted to be less rigid. That maybe she was right. Maybe love needed to be flexible in this day and age. She had no idea I was quoting her, word for word, from a message she sent to Silas 2 months ago. He just needs to evolve. Once he forgives me, it'll be easy. I didn't forgive her. I didn't even hate her. I had moved past both. What I was doing now was something else entirely. I was being graceful, deliberate. It's the grace you give before you cut the final thread. Not out of cruelty, but precision. I played the part well. Every morning, I kissed her forehead. Every night, I asked how her day went. I scheduled therapy sessions for us. Sessions that didn't exist. I paid an old college friend to pose as the therapist on the call logs. Mira didn't question it. She loved the illusion of progress. It made her feel noble, like she had rescued a lost husband from the edge of emotional fragility. She called me stronger now. She told me she was proud of me. And every time she said those words, I smiled. Because I knew the storm was getting closer. It wasn't rage that kept me going. It was clarity. See, rage fades. But truth? Truth stays sharp. Even in silence. Especially in silence. I began spending more time with Silas, too. That was her idea. Said it would help rebuild the bond between brothers. Said it was important for her to see us united. She didn't know I had already recorded a full conversation between them. One where Silas said, "He's soft. He wants to be liked too much. He won't leave you. He needs you." The man was sitting on a landmine and didn't even know it. So I met him for drinks. We sat across from each other at a whiskey bar downtown, dim lights, leather booths. He ordered the most expensive bottle like always and flashed his teeth like a man used to taking things that didn't belong to him. "You look better," he said, swirling the amber in his glass. "Like you finally let go of the weight." I nodded. "You were right, Silas. I needed to grow up." He grinned, smug and stupid. "Told you. Life's too short for being sentimental. I pretended to agree. He went on about business, about real estate, about the vineyard, my vineyard, as if it were already his. I asked him for advice. Let him lecture me. I let him believe he'd finally won the prize he'd been circling since I was 13. It's funny how people will show you exactly who they are if you act like you're not a threat. He even clinked his glass against mine. To starting over. I lifted mine slowly. To Grace. He laughed. Whatever helps you sleep at night. The irony was, I was sleeping. Better than I had in years. Each night, I took another breath of freedom. And each morning, I added another nail to the coffin they were building for themselves. Mira started making new plans. New vacations. Talked about Paris in the spring. Talked about looking at new properties with better views. I let her talk. Let her dream. Let her believe this marriage was getting stronger. Because when it ended, I wanted her to feel every inch of the fall. She even asked if we should renew our vows. I nearly choked on my coffee. But I smiled, leaned in, kissed her temple, and said, only if we write them ourselves. She clapped her hands like a teenager, excited and full of fake innocence. I watched her that night as she typed something on her phone under the covers, her screen barely visible. Probably telling Silas that things were going smoothly, that I was melting. And maybe I was. But not for her. I was melting the mask I'd worn for too long. One day, I walked into the room while she was on the phone with her sister. She quickly muted it, tried to wave me off like she was saying something trivial. I said nothing, just smiled, walked over, brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. She looked touched, vulnerable, like the guilt was trying to seep in. But I wasn't offering forgiveness. I was offering her one last act of grace. Not for her benefit, for mine. See, when you know what someone's done, really done, it's easy to be calm. Their power over you disappears. Their lies turn hollow. Their affection becomes noise. The only thing that matters is your decision. And I'd made mine. The last thing to prepare was myself. I stood in front of the mirror the morning before the dinner. The suit hung sharp on my frame. Navy. Crisp white shirt. A black tie Mira had bought me years ago, saying I looked like a man with purpose when I wore it. I fixed the collar, adjusted the cuffs, took a long look at myself. Not the version of me they liked, quiet, agreeable, forgettable. The real one. The man who remembered everything, who felt everything, and who decided enough was enough. Downstairs, I opened the drawer in the study, pulled out the final copy of the letter I'd written her. Read it once. Mira. Grace isn't weakness. It's power that doesn't need to shout. You mistook my silence for softness. Now you'll learn what it sounds like when a man speaks with truth. Love. The husband you tried to rewire. I folded it, slid it into her envelope, right on top of the divorce papers. Then I walked outside, letting the late afternoon sun hit my face. The world felt louder somehow, but I was quiet and ready. Tomorrow, they would all sit at a table decorated in gold, with glasses full of champagne and mouths ready to praise themselves. They would toast to maturity, to modern love, to progress. And I'd smile, just one more time. Then I'd break the silence, and they'd finally understand what grace really looks like. The sky was painted in soft streaks of pink and orange when we arrived. Mira loved timing things like this. She said golden hour made everything more photogenic, her words, not mine. She stepped out of the car like she was descending onto a runway, adjusting her gold dress while smiling just enough to seem effortless. She glanced at me once, her eyes shining. You ready? She asked, as if this was just another celebration. I smiled back. I've never been more ready. She didn't know that by the end of the night, she'd never wear that dress again. We walked into the restaurant through a private entrance. The lights were soft, the scent of lavender and age would floating through the air. Every little detail was elegant, subtle, intentional. Her vision, she called it. But the execution? That was mine. Our guests were already arriving. My parents were seated near the head of the table. My sister and cousin Nina were chatting by the wine bar. Silas was fashionably late, as always. I watched Mira scan the room like a proud host, checking on the seating, the music, the lighting. Everything was going to plan, just not hers. The servers moved smoothly through the space, offering drinks, adjusting place settings, smiling politely. No one questioned their presence. Why would they? They were dressed the part, polished, coordinated, professional. But they weren't waiters. Not a single one. The man serving wine, ex-litigator turned legal researcher. The woman arranging the napkins, A freelance court reporter who'd spent a decade in deposition rooms. The guy pouring water and nodding at each guest? Enzo, my quiet ace. Former surveillance contractor. Now playing a role in the final act of this very public performance. Each of them had a task, a cue, and all of it revolved around the signal. The one I'd give when it was time. I moved slowly through the room, shaking hands, pretending to laugh. My mother gave me the same tired, "You've always been such a quiet boy" smile. My father clapped my shoulder and slipped me a birthday card that felt more like a contract renewal than anything from the heart. Silas finally arrived, unbothered as usual. He gave Mira a kiss on the cheek that lingered half a second too long. No one batted an eye. They never did. It was part of their twisted little dance. I greeted him with a smile and a nod. "You clean up well, brother," he said, smirking. "Thanks. So do you," I replied, watching the gold watch I bought him flash under the lights. He took a seat directly across from me. Of course he did. He always had to sit across from me. As if we were in constant competition, even now. Mira gave a small speech before dinner began. Nothing dramatic, just a few sweet lines about love and growth and how grateful she was for the people around us. She glanced at Silas more than once. When she finally sat, I raised my glass, pretending to toast along with the others. I waited for the main course to be served. The room buzzed with low. I leaned over to the man clearing my appetizer plate, Enzo, looked at the guest he was just another server, and whispered, "Now." He gave a tiny nod, then calmly stepped back and disappeared toward the bar. The music shifted first. The jazz in the background faded into silence. A soft mechanical click followed as the hidden projector screen began to lower behind the head table. Subtle enough to seem accidental until it wasn't. People looked up, confused, then curious. Myra's brow creased. "What is that?" she asked, leaning toward me. Before I could answer, Enzo appeared again, this time not with a wine bottle, but a sleek black remote in hand. He cleared his throat, voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Walsh," he said, addressing me formally, "would you like to begin?" I nodded once. He pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, and the light finally started to crack. The first slide was simple, a photo. Mira and Silas. My vineyard. Her in the blue dress. His hand too familiar on her waist. Silas's eyes went wide. Myra's jaw tightened. Murmurs rippled through the room. Then came the audio. Myra's voice first, laughing. "He still thinks I hate going to the vineyard. He has no idea we've been using it like our little getaway." Then Silas, he's soft. He's used to being ignored. He'll never say anything. The laughter that followed chilled the room. I stood slowly, adjusting my sleeves. I wasn't going to say anything, I said quietly, but the room hushed. I thought maybe I could move past it. I thought maybe I could forgive what happened once or twice. But then I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was a partnership. I turned toward Mira. "You planned this dinner to show off your version of healing," I said. "I planned it to reveal your version of the truth." She looked stunned, like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "This isn't a game," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "It's an audit." Enzo passed around the envelopes one by one. My father opened his first, his expression shifting from confusion to fear as he scanned the wire transfer logs. My mother opened hers, reading the transcript of her own voice from that brunch, her lips parting in slow realization. Nina blinked at the still shots and dates, eyes darting around the room as if looking for a place to hide. Silas didn't open his envelope. He stared at me. "You're insane," he muttered. I nodded. "You're welcome to call your lawyer, but I'd recommend doing it before dessert." Mira finally looked at her envelope. She didn't open it right away. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked. I stepped toward her. "You once said I was a loyal dog who wouldn't bite. You laughed about how I'd never find out. You said I was easy to manage. And maybe I was. But I was never blind." She opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was her letter, her timeline, the divorce papers, and at the very bottom, a copy of the prenup clause she forgot I'd updated 2 years ago. After a discussion about shared loyalty, she'd broken every part of it. Her access to everything? Frozen. Her credibility? Collapsing. Silas rose from his seat, clenching his fists. "You've ruined everything." I turned to him calmly. "No, I just stopped letting you ruin me." He lunged forward, but 2 of the waiters blocked him, Enzo's team. "Sit down, Mr. Walsh," one of them said coolly, "or we'll be forced to escort you out." My family didn't know what to say, because for the first time, they weren't in control of the story. I was. I walked back to my seat, lifted my glass. To truth, I said. Then I drank it down and left them there. Mouths open, hands shaking, facades crumbling. Just like I planned. There's a special kind of silence that follows shame. It's heavier than guilt, sharper than anger. It hangs in the air like static before lightning, clinging to the skin, crackling in the throat. That's the silence that filled the room the moment the video started playing. First came the text messages, projected in bold, glowing clarity against the sleek white wall behind us. Silas, he's dull. He doesn't challenge her. Honestly, I think she's settled. Mira, I know. I used to think he'd grow into something. But he's just background noise. Background noise. I stood at the far end of the table, facing them, watching their eyes as the words they thought would stay private now stared back at them like ghosts. No one said a thing. Not a gasp. Not a protest. Just silence. Then came the second slide. A video footage from my vineyard. The hidden camera positioned perfectly beneath the edge of the patio railing. Silas and Mira, laughing, drinking wine, holding each other like a couple on vacation. Her voice echoed across the room. He still doesn't know. It's almost pathetic. Silas leaned in, his mouth on her neck, his tone smug. He'll never find out. He's too soft. The room tensed. I saw Nina's face go pale. My sister looked down at her plate like it might explain something. Even my father shifted uncomfortably, his mouth pressed into a flat, grim line. And my mother? She was reaching for the remote, desperate to stop it. But Enzo was already there. Don't, I said calmly. Let it play. She froze. Because there's no dignity in denial when the truth is right there. Clear. Unfiltered. In high definition. The next video clip rolled in like thunder. Mira again, this time in our bedroom, talking on the phone. She was lying on our bed, twisting the hem of her shirt between her fingers. I keep telling him I'm going to therapy, she said into the speaker. Meanwhile, Silas and I are planning our escape. Once the vineyard paperwork clears, we'll ghost him. There it was. Her entire plan. Her voice. Her face. Her betrayal. Everything captured, logged, and timestamped. Myra's hand flew to her mouth. Not in sorrow. Not in regret. In panic. Because she didn't expect this. Not from me. Not from the man she called safe. My lawyer, Victor. Rose from his seat in the corner. He'd said maybe 5 words all night. But now, with the projector still rolling, he stepped forward. He cleared his throat, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the silence. Mira, he said, you'll be hearing from us regarding multiple counts of marital fraud, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to commit asset transfer under false pretenses. A full forensic audit has been initiated. Mira blinked at him, then at me. You're doing this to me? She whispered. No, I replied. You did this. I'm just letting the lights come on. Silas shot up from his chair. This is insane, he barked. You think any of this will hold up in court? Victor tilted his head slightly, calm as ever. The documents have already been filed. You'll be receiving copies by morning. But you're welcome to continue speaking. Just know that this entire room is under legal observation. That shut him up. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because betrayal doesn't just come from lovers. It also comes from blood. I turned to my father and slid an envelope across the table. He stared at it like it was poison. Open it, I said. He didn't move. So I opened it for him. Inside, a single page. DNA results. I looked him straight in the eye. You always said I wasn't like you, I said. Turns out, you were right. The silence cracked. Gasps. A fork clattered. My mother looked between the paper and my face like she was seeing a ghost. My father said nothing. Not even a denial. Because he knew. And that silence was its own confession. You were never proud of me because I wasn't yours, I said. But I still gave you everything. My respect. My loyalty. I thought maybe one day I'd be enough. I shook my head. But I was chasing something that was never real. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. And free. I turned back to Mira. You used my silence to write your story, I said. You thought I was too dull, too slow, too blind. But I wasn't. I was patient. She stood slowly, her body shaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. That's the problem, I replied. You never thought I mattered enough for it to go anywhere at all. She reached toward me. Please, we can talk. Not here. Not like this. But there was nothing left to talk about. Everything that needed to be said had been said. On tape. On paper. In her own words. And now, it was hers to carry. I turned to the rest of the room. My silence, I said, was never consent. I glanced at my mother. You raised me to be quiet, to be small, to never make a scene. But all that did was make me invisible and easy to betray. My sister opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I don't need apologies, I said. I don't want excuses. I walked toward the door slowly. Enjoy the rest of the evening, I said. And just as I reached the exit, I paused. One last glance over my shoulder. My birthday wish? I said with a soft smile. I just wanted to be seen. Then I walked out. And this time, no one followed me. They didn't call the next morning. Not Mira. Not Silas. Not my parents. No one. It was like the dinner never happened. Like it was just a strange, bad dream they were trying to sleep through. But denial only lasts so long. Eventually, the smoke clears, and you're left with the ruin. Not just ash, but the shame of what you helped burn. The first call came on the third day. Mira. I let it ring. 10 minutes later, she texted. Please. We need to talk. I didn't know you'd go this far. Go this far? I stared at the message, not sure whether to laugh or throw my phone into the sea. They'd gone further. Much further. They didn't just cheat on a husband. They orchestrated an arrangement, fed by my own bloodline. They fed the fire and then dared to act shocked when it burned the house down. I never replied. That same evening, my mother sent a long email titled, Let's Talk Like Family. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew the rhythm of her justifications. She'd talk about how emotions are complicated, how we don't always choose who we love, and how sometimes silence is an act of protection. But silence is not protection. Silence is permission. They knew what Silas and Mira were doing. They all knew. Every dinner, every glance, every whisper behind closed doors, they knew. And they chose to do nothing. No, worse. They helped. My sister texted the next day. I didn't know it was that serious. I'm sorry if I contributed to your pain. If. That word. That coward's word. I didn't respond to her either. Instead, I went back to work. Not corporate work, my work. The kind I'd been building quietly in the background. A podcast. A blog. A digital journal of sorts, where I can speak freely without being talked over by people who only valued my silence. I called it The Betrayal Beneath the Silverware. The title made people curious. The content made them stay. I didn't use real names. I didn't need to. The story was what mattered. I told people what it felt like to be erased while everyone smiled at your table. What it meant to be loved in front of guests but dismissed in private. What it cost to stay loyal in a room full of traitors. I didn't scream into the mic. I didn't rant. I spoke plainly, carefully, like I was documenting a storm that had already passed. And that's what drew people in. Within 3 weeks, it went viral. Emails poured in. Men, women, strangers who had lived through their own betrayal, their own polite destruction, thanking me for telling a story they thought only existed in their heads. The irony? I became more visible in the aftermath than I ever was at home. It turns out, people want the truth. Not the polished version. Not the one dressed in fine linen and expensive wine. The real one. Meanwhile, Myra's world started crumbling. The consulting business she ran, on paper, was flagged for financial inconsistencies. Why? Because I'd reported it. Quietly. Through a third-party firm I used to work with in risk management. Her accounts were frozen within a week. She tried to log in from 3 different devices. All denied. Her new apartment, yes, she'd moved out days after the dinner, was leased in her name, but the deposit came from our joint marital account, which now had a legal freeze pending the divorce proceedings. Silas? He was being investigated by our Vineyards Investor Board. The board I no longer sat on, but still had stock in. You'd be surprised how many hands you can move without ever stepping into a meeting. They called me 2 days after the dinner. Is it true? One of the investors asked. I emailed them the proof. His resignation followed shortly after. Apparently, it's hard to stay on as a public partner when your scandal is trending under #GoldenBoyGoneGray. Even my father reached out, though he didn't say much. He showed up at my office unannounced, looking older than usual. His face was drawn, like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't want this to happen, he said. I didn't offer him a seat. You didn't want it to be exposed, I corrected. He didn't argue. Just looked down at the floor like it might offer a script he hadn't prepared. I never thought you'd go public. I raised an eyebrow. Because you thought I was too loyal to ever speak? He looked away. You wanted me to stay silent, I said. That's all this ever was. You wanted to protect your image, not me. You made us all look terrible, he said. No, I replied, stepping closer. You made yourselves look terrible. I just stopped cleaning the mirror. He didn't say anything after that. Just walked out. I watched him go, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed him anything. Because I didn't. That's the thing about being the quiet one, the good one, the one who always keeps the peace. No one notices when you leave the table. Until you flip it over. I moved out of the family home soon after. Took only what was mine. Books, clothes, documents. The rest I left behind. Let Mira keep the silence she loved so much. I settled into a small place overlooking the coast. Nothing grand, but peaceful and honest. The first morning there, I made my own coffee. Watched the sunrise without anyone telling me to pose for it. And I breathed. Not the shallow breaths I'd learned to survive on. A full one. Deep and slow and real. The kind that fills your lungs with a future. I still get messages from people I used to call family. Some angry. Some apologetic. Some just confused. But I don't answer them anymore. They want closure. I already have mine. Because the truth is, I didn't burn the family down. They did. I just refused to put the fire out this time. I used to think the consequences were cruel. That to enforce boundaries, to hold someone accountable, was an act of violence. That silence was more virtuous than confrontation. That walking away was too dramatic, too permanent. But I don't believe that anymore. Consequences aren't cruel. They're honest. They're the final form of truth when words are wasted and apologies are dressed in manipulation. And now, Mira was living in hers. Her business, the one she used my name, my network, and my credit to build, was under audit. Investigators traced every consulting payment that my father funneled into her account. Most of them were unreported. Some had come from shell companies linked to Silas. She tried to spin it, of course. Claimed it was all above board. Claimed I was doing this out of spite. But it's hard to argue with timestamps, voice recordings, and fraud alerts. Her brand partnerships dropped her. Clients walked. Her name, once wrapped in glitter, was now stuck to the word embezzlement on a growing number of legal filings. Silas didn't fare much better. He was used to skating by money could buy silence, charm could buy forgiveness. But this wasn't a barroom scandal or a minor tabloid rumor. This was business. Public. Documented. One of the vineyard's major investors filed a lawsuit. Another pulled out completely. His reputation, so carefully curated for years, collapsed like wet paper under weight. He tried reaching out to me twice. The first time was a voicemail. No apology, just a condescending lecture. This doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look bitter. You need to grow up. I saved it. Might use it for a podcast episode later. The second time, he showed up at my office. He didn't make it past the front desk. Because I no longer worked in the office. I had stepped down from the board, sold my shares at their peak value, and invested in something that felt like mine. Not legacy. Not inheritance. Mine. A studio downtown where I recorded my podcast. A quiet writing room. A space for people to come and talk. Unfiltered. Honest. Human. I called it the Echo Room. Because echoes never lie, they just reflect the truth back in your own voice. The first in-person gathering I hosted was a storytelling night. People came in, sat in a circle, and told the moment they realized someone they loved no longer saw them as real. There were tears, laughter, long silences. It felt like healing. Not the kind wrapped in slogans or workshops. The kind that grows in the spaces where lies used to live. Meanwhile, Myra's circle thinned. Her sister blocked her. Her own friends stopped inviting her out, afraid she might be the next story. Funny how quickly people retreat when the mask slips. She sent me a letter one afternoon. A thick envelope, handwritten. Inside was 3 pages of soft words. Regret. Nostalgia. Phrases like, I didn't mean to lose you, and I just wanted to feel chosen again. At the bottom, she wrote, you didn't deserve this. You were the most gentle thing in my life. I mistook that for weakness. She asked to meet. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. Because I was done. See, some things are forgivable. But betrayal by design isn't one of them. She didn't trip into Silas's arms. She mapped the fall. She orchestrated the silence. She sat across from me for months, calling it growth, while planting seeds of deception in my own soil. And I watered them with patience, with hope, with grace, until I realized I wasn't gardening a marriage. I was tending a graveyard. So no, I didn't meet her. I burned the letter. Quietly. Alone. Because not everything needs an audience. Sometimes, closure is simply choosing peace and not announcing it. My mother tried harder. She left voice notes. Long ones. Talking about legacy, family, forgiveness. She wanted to fix the narrative, stitch the threads back together before the world saw the unraveling too clearly. But I wasn't interested in repairing illusions. She once told me, family means protecting each other, even from the truth. I used to believe her. But that wasn't protection. That was complicity. So I replied, for the first and only time. Just one line. Love without accountability is just a performance. She didn't message again. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Clean. Precise. The house was sold. The assets divided as per the updated prenup. She tried to appeal. Failed. Tried to delay. Denied. And then, just silence. Not the kind I used to know. Not the suffocating kind that made me doubt my worth. This silence was mine. Peaceful. Earned. And I filled it with better things. I walked every morning along the coastline, letting the ocean remind me that movement doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. I read again. Cooked. Laughed with strangers who became friends. And every so often, someone would recognize my voice from the podcast and say, thank you. Not for the scandal. Not for the drama. But for the truth. Because truth, when Spock. You just speak. That meant something to me. Because I had spent years crying inwardly, privately, making sure no one ever saw the cracks. Now, I let them show. And I've never been stronger. Some people say I was cruel. That I humiliated my family. That I planned their shame. But here's what they don't understand. I didn't create their betrayal. I just refused to carry it anymore. I stopped being the secret keeper. The peacekeeper. The one who swallowed the fire so others could eat in comfort. And when I finally opened my mouth, I didn't spit flames. I held up a mirror. They burned themselves on the reflection. So no, consequences are not cruel. They are clarity. They are what happens when silence finally stops being mistaken for permission. And now, I live out loud. I speak freely. I breathe deeply. I laugh fully. And most of all, I look in the mirror and say, you weren't weak. You were surrounded by people afraid of your strength. And now that they can't silence it, they finally hear it.